The story begins with the protagonist explaining the future. He knows that 10 years from now, the Federation Kingdom of the East will fall at the hands of the 5 great sins. To prevent that outcome, he has chosen to become their patron. After that declaration, the scene shifts to him sitting alone in his office. His body trembles as fear slowly catches up to him. He never expected this decision to turn into something so serious and overwhelming. He then reflects on how he ended up in this world. In his previous life, he had been a wage slave working 78-hour weeks. One day, he possessed the body of a noble in a fantasy world. It was not entirely bad, but it was far from ideal. Back in the present, he stares at a book in his hands, unable to understand a single word written inside it. He realizes that he cannot read the language of this world. Nearby, a servant notices the situation and internally points out that the book is being held upside down. This leads the protagonist to acknowledge a harsh truth. In this world, he is illiterate and possesses no powers whatsoever. Later, a servant informs him that his meal is ready. He sits at a grand dining table and begins eating. The food tastes surprisingly good, leaving him momentarily satisfied. After the meal, a maid approaches from behind and prepares to help him bathe before bed. As this happens, he recalls the awkward experience of being assisted during bathing. Despite the confusion, he reflects on the comfort of being the young master of a count's family, living a life where he can remain useless and pampered, even though he still has no idea where exactly he is. During the bath, a maid mentions that the other young masters will be returning the next day and advises him to sleep early. This leaves him confused. She then explains that she is referring to Leo and Tonio, the young masters of the household, and wonders why he seems unfamiliar with his own family. The name Palatio suddenly catches his attention. It sounds disturbingly familiar to him. Confusion overwhelms him, and he rubs his head before submerging his face into the bathwater. The maids panic as he does not immediately resurface. As his thoughts spiral, he questions whether he is trapped in a hallucination. Then, memories from his previous life surface. He remembers a game he once played called Psychedelia. He recalls that it was a turn-based RPG he used to play whenever he had free time. No matter which route the player chose, the moment the 5 great sins appeared, wrath, greed, sloth, pride, and obsession, the kingdom, its nobility, and the cities would all begin to collapse. Within that game, the Palatio House was a notorious noble family involved in prostitution and drug trafficking, operating an organization known as Avalon. They were part of a subquest that appeared before the main episode even began. The eldest son, Leo Palatio, ruled the world of prostitution, while the second son, Tonio Palatio, controlled the drug trade. When he finally realizes that he has reincarnated into the very same game, devastation hits him. He drops to the ground, fully aware that he now understands exactly where he is. He remembers how the first subquest of the game always began here, involving the investigation of the Palatio House and its illegal activities. Recalling this fills him with disbelief and frustration. The Palatios were among the first to be destroyed by the 5 great sins, even though the subquests here provided a large amount of experience. Only then does he remember the role he played in the game. He was an extra villain, the 3rd son of the Palatio House, Alan Palatio. Later, he lies on his bed, emotionally exhausted, wishing he could return to his old life as an overworked wage slave. Despite living in luxury now, he knows he will die in 10 years. To him, this fate feels worse than months of unpaid wages. He cannot understand why he possessed a fantasy character with no powers when others gained so much more. While crying, he suddenly recalls something important. The concept of powers resurfaces in his mind. As he sits up, a realization forms. Knowing what will happen 10 years into the future is equivalent to being a prophet. This realization sparks a new idea. If he knows the cause of the world's downfall, then removing those causes should be possible. With that thought, he decides to reform the 5 great sins for the sake of securing a peaceful, noble life. He looks out the window and considers the possibility. Since the 5 great sins are still children, it should be achievable, even though he himself possesses no powers. 2 months later, he is seen sitting at his office desk, reviewing documents. A servant approaches and reports that the orphans from the Eastern Orphanage, which was secretly a human testing center, have been rescued. Management of the facility has been entrusted to a girl named Yusha. The servant delivering the report is Evan, Alan's knight. After hearing Evan's report, the protagonist simply closes his eyes and acknowledges Evan's skill. Evan hesitates, uncertain whether the remark was praise, as the protagonist's facial expression gives nothing away. The protagonist confirms it plainly, then forces an awkward smile and expresses his intention to continue working together. Evan reacts with visible discomfort, thinking that he will not get used to that expression anytime soon. To him, the young master used to be far more expressive. At the same time, the protagonist looks at himself in a mirror, adjusting his smile. He reflects that his possession of this body seems to have stopped at the face alone. Evan awkwardly thanks him for the praise. As the protagonist watches him, he reflects on Evan's role in the game Psychedelia. Evan is a rare character who remains honest and loyal even in the middle of endless betrayals. The protagonist remembers hiring him immediately upon finding him. Evan then brings up Yusha, confirming that the operation was done to save her. The protagonist affirms this. Evan admits that he understands why, stating that even from the perspective of a longtime mercenary, Yusha was far from an ordinary child. Evan recalls the moment he first found her, bound inside a cell. Even then, her strength was evident, to the point that he could not understand why she allowed herself to remain imprisoned. Back in the present, Evan wonders why she was not brought to the estate, noting that there was no clear benefit in keeping her there. The protagonist settles more comfortably in his chair and agrees. Outwardly, it might appear that he is neglecting her rather than making use of her. However, internally, he calculates carefully. Leaving her where she is a deliberate part of his plan. Yusha Bludia is a non-human who, in the future, signs a contract with an otherworldly being and becomes the sin of wrath, responsible for the deaths of hundreds of thousands. The protagonist tightens his fist, thinking that she should never become wrath if she grows up in peace. In his mind, this is one landmine successfully dealt with, even if it requires excuses for now. Snapping out of his thoughts, he speaks seriously to Evan and makes it clear that the timing is not right yet. Evan is confused by this explanation, but accepts it. The protagonist instructs him to ensure that no rumors spread and that sufficient funds are provided. He then hands Evan a letter meant for Yusha. The letter is not urgent, but rather intended to check on her condition and offer reassurance after everything she has endured. Evan accepts the task respectfully and promises to deliver it. Sometime later, Evan travels on horseback toward the destination. The protagonist watches him leave from the window, sweat forming on his face. He admits to himself that he does not know whether the letter will truly reassure her, but believes it is worth trying. In his thoughts, he recalls the true purpose of the letter. It is meant to plant a concept he has heard dozens of times before. Memories from his previous life surface, recalling a scene involving an archbishop attempting to calm the sin of wrath through a ritual meant to befriend a non-human. He remembers that in the game, those attempts always failed and the battle inevitably began. Recalling the future villain's attack, he knows that once it reaches that point, it is already too late. However, he reasons that this moment is different. Perhaps it's not too late now. Yawning, he wonders whether he should move on to the next target, since one has already been handled. Even as sweat forms from the weight of his imagination, he acknowledges how absurd it sounds to try to befriend a monster using words alone. Still, considering their belief in otherworldly gods, it might actually work. He reflects that it is difficult to understand how such beings think, concluding that they are closer to fanatics than anything else. Elsewhere, a white-haired girl named Yusha holds the letter Evan delivered. Evan stands before her, overwhelmed by the immense mana radiating from her body. To him, she feels strange, almost devoid of emotion. Yusha asks whether Alan is truly the one who sent the letter. Her expression hardens as she questions why he did not want her by his side. Evan is startled, his mind racing. He struggles to respond while realizing that manifesting mana at this level is something only possible in the Master Realm. He recalls the protagonist's earlier words about timing. Regaining his composure, he explains that the reason is simply that it is not yet time. Upon hearing this, Yusha calms down. She accepts the explanation quietly. Holding the letter close to her chest, she interprets it as a promise that only her master would understand. In that moment, Evan feels a chill and instinctively reaches for his sword. Yusha then smiles brightly. Under a moon glowing red in the night sky, she fully accepts his meaning. This girl is destined to become the sin of wrath, the daughter of monsters, the bloody Queen Yusha. Meanwhile, the protagonist lies comfortably on his bed. He reflects that he has managed to extend his luxurious lifespan, if only by a little. Hugging his pillow, he notices the bright moon outside and takes it as encouragement. With that thought, he resolves to work just as carefully on the next child as well. The protagonist searches through his cupboard, trying to find something specific. In the process, a book suddenly slips free and strikes his head, followed by several others tumbling down and scattering across the floor. Irritated, he looks at the mess and realizes that what he is searching for is not there after all. Inside his thoughts, he admits that trying to find clues about the third boss has been giving him a constant headache. At that moment, Evan enters the room and walks toward him. He reports that they have successfully rescued the second child the protagonist had mentioned. The protagonist responds calmly, confirming whether the child was treated kindly. Evan assures him that this was done properly after rescuing the child from the illegal slave market. Before the conversation can continue, someone suddenly rushes into the room. It is Tonio Palacio, the second son of the county. Tonio immediately begins harassing the protagonist, pressing down on his head and mocking him for holding a book despite being illiterate. When the protagonist does not respond, Tonio increases the pressure, demanding an answer. Inside his mind, the protagonist feels weighed down. Tonio has always been a constant nuisance. He wonders how the original Alan endured this treatment. Though he wants to retaliate, he knows better. Instead, he bows deeply and respectfully, choosing to remove himself from the situation. Tonio reacts by placing his foot on the protagonist's face and forcing him to the floor, clearly satisfied with his dominance. Suddenly, a knife flies in from behind and embeds itself into the wall directly in front of them. A heavy presence fills the room as someone steps forward and silences them with authority, stating that they are being too noisy. Anger flashes across Tonio's face as he reacts. The newcomer makes it clear that he does not want to see blood spilled so early in the day and orders Tonio to leave. This person is revealed to be Leo Palacio, the first son of the county. Tonio responds with a smile, grabbing Leo by the collar and mocking his attitude. Leo answers by raising his knife close to Tonio's neck, warning him to leave while he still can, pointing out the stench of drugs clinging to him. Still on the floor, the protagonist reflects quietly. In the game, the Palacio County disappeared quickly, yet seeing them now makes him realize how dangerous they truly are. Memories from his past life surface. He recalls the subquest involving the investigation of the Palacio County of the Asteria Kingdom, a noble house involved in prostitution, drug distribution, and the operation of an organization called Avalon. Thinking further, he realizes that their power far exceeded what he originally believed. The two brothers are locked in a struggle for the position of family head, one ruling the underworld as the prostitution king, the other managing a massive drug cartel as the drug king. Slowly crawling away from the library hall, the protagonist resolves not to interfere with either of them for the sake of preserving his own life. Evan appears from behind and gently fixes the protagonist's disheveled hair. Internally, the protagonist reaffirms his decision to live quietly as a weak and incompetent bastard child. Once he reaches a sofa, he finally relaxes, letting out a tired sigh. Evan then mentions that the second child they rescued also did not seem ordinary. The protagonist responds weakly, barely lifting his head. Inside his thoughts, Evan struggles to understand how someone like the protagonist managed to uncover information about the illegal slave market and secret bioexperiments occurring in an entirely different region. Observing his exhausted state, Evan senses that the young master is barely holding himself together. The protagonist admits his exhaustion openly. In Evan's mind, the young master feels increasingly strange. Still, he confirms that the rescued child has been sent to an orphanage. The protagonist acknowledges this quietly. Inside his thoughts, the protagonist fixates on Evan's earlier remark. The child was not merely unusual. He was a being of catastrophic scale. Memories resurface again. Within a united kingdom composed of multiple nations, the central power is the Kalian Kingdom. The child they rescued from the illegal slave market is none other than Deus Mikaelian, the the second boss of psychedelia. He remembers what happens later. After being sold into slavery and abused as he was passed from place to place, that child becomes the embodiment of one of the 5 deadly sins, the sin of sloth. He eventually annihilates entire kingdoms in unimaginably horrific ways. The protagonist recalls how many players were shocked at this stage of the game, confronted by its cruelty. Back in the present, he drinks tea slowly, his expression tense. Despite the title sin of sloth, Deus was known to be extraordinarily diligent, repaying both kindness and cruelty many times over. That is precisely why the protagonist insisted that Evan treat him with extreme kindness. After a brief pause, another thought surfaces. The events tied to that future are deeply graphic. Still sipping his tea, the protagonist finally reflects on the reason he sent Deus to the orphanage. Once again, it comes down to timing. It is simply not yet time. Evan responds that this was exactly what he expected. He understands that the letter sent to Yusha also concerned the second child. The protagonist confirms this while holding his teacup, noting that he also included a bit of ordinary conversation. In his thoughts, he recalls telling Yusha to take care of the slightly sick child he had entrusted to her. The scene shifts to the orphanage. In an open field surrounded by trees, 2 girls and a boy are playing together. A short distance away, McCallion stands alone, separated from the others. From behind him, a voice emerges, calmly stating that he is broken. It notices the cuts on his palms and identifies them as traces left by something unnatural. After a brief pause, the voice identifies the cause as the black goat. Yusha steps out from the shadows with a faint smile. She remarks that despite everything, the great moon has still chosen him. She encourages him to feel the power he has been granted and to allow his potential to awaken. She explains that if he remains loyal and follows the will of the one above, he will be granted his revenge. McCallion remains tense as Yusha calmly mentions that it is time for her to send her first reply, beginning with a light greeting. Back at his residence, the protagonist sits on the floor, surrounded by books, searching through them with growing frustration. He cannot locate the third boss and feels increasingly irritated by the delay. Suddenly, Evan rushes into the room, visibly shaken. He announces that there is serious trouble, correcting himself as he explains that it involves the second young master. The protagonist reacts in shock, his thoughts immediately racing to the possibility that Tonio might already be dead. The scene transitions to a funeral. Tonio's father sits solemnly as 2 women lean against him, one dressed in red and the other in blue, behaving casually and without restraint. Observing this, the protagonist thinks bitterly about how drugs and women have been brought to his son's funeral. He already knew the Palacio family was deeply flawed, but the reality still leaves an impression of a dark fantasy world. His attention shifts to Tonio's body resting inside the coffin. Tonio's death being ruled as an accidental fall is different from what the protagonist remembers from the game. He recalls the original version of events. In the game, Leo eventually killed Tonio after decades of rivalry and claimed the title of Count Palacio. Leo had cried openly, declaring that he had finally eliminated his brother after all those years. Looking at Leo now, the protagonist notices the unmistakable expression of satisfaction on his face, as if he were thinking of it as a lucky break. The protagonist reflects that Leo could at least try to hide his emotions. He concludes that the culprit must be Leo or one of his followers. Regardless, his focus remains on resolving the threat of the 5 deadly sins. 1 year later, the protagonist explains the situation to Evan over tea. With the succession issue resolved and Leo absorbing the drug business, the county has become noticeably more stable. During breakfast, the protagonist reflects on his correspondence with Yusha. Over time, they have become pen pals. Holding one of her letters, he believes that maintaining contact with her will be useful in the future. As he reads, a faint smile appears on his face. Viewed this way, the children almost seem normal. The letter includes a list of sponsors for the orphanage, which has grown once again. The increasing number of sponsors for such a small orphanage strikes him as unusual but not unwelcome. Evan agrees that while it is strange, it is still a positive development. Evan then recalls something important. Regarding the item the protagonist has been searching for, the Information Guild has reported that they have found a clue. The protagonist feels immediate relief. In his thoughts, He assumes it must be an ancient book related to the third boss and feels satisfied that he will finally be able to locate them as well. Later, he reflects quietly that everything seems to be progressing smoothly. It feels like a peaceful evening. Suddenly, a scream breaks the calm. The scene shifts to a drug distribution site in Margot. Two men walk together, one casually tossing an object into the air. The short-haired man comments on how generous the eldest son of the Palacio family is, frequently offering large rewards. His long-haired companion notes that their organization now numbers several hundred members. They soon encounter corpses scattered across the ground, soaked in blood. The long-haired man remarks that it is almost complete. More figures appear, revealing that those lying on the ground were their own companions. Panic spreads as some of them realize they can no longer control their bodies. Hands move on their own, turning weapons inward. Screams echo as they are forced to kill themselves, unable to resist. From the shadows, a motionless figure emerges, radiating an unnatural presence. From behind that figure, Yusha steps forward. She remarks that she enjoyed the puppet show and notes that there is still more to report. The shadowy figure questions the purpose of this act. Yusha asks whether pity is the reason. The figure's face is revealed to be Macallion. He explains that he does not pity them, but acknowledges that they ground people down to create drugs. He simply questions whether this truly serves his revenge. Yusha answers calmly, explaining that it does help. Creating space is necessary for his return. With a smile, she adds that the place must not be left in ruins when he arrives. Macallion accepts her explanation. The two of them slowly rise into the air, their powers lifting them effortlessly. Yusha declares that everything will proceed according to his will, and that they, the Blue Moon, shall act as his sword. The scene ends with the image of a circle carved into the city road, a crescent moon etched clearly within it. The scene begins with the protagonist reflecting on the passage of time. 2 years have passed since he began corresponding with Yusha as a pen pal. Evan searches for the protagonist, clearly exhausted. While looking for him, he stumbles and falls to the ground. Still lying there, he announces his return and realizes that the protagonist is in the backyard. Despite his fatigue, Evan raises his thumb cheerfully and reports that the 5th child has also been successfully sent to the orphanage. Covering his mouth, the protagonist reflects internally that during this period, he has managed to save the remaining 3 sins as well. He sits down on the floor and offers Evan a piece of cake. Evan crawls closer, grumbling weakly as he accepts it. The protagonist tosses a few macarons into the air for Evan to catch, thinking back on the difficulty he had locating Greed, the 3rd one. However, having Evan work alongside him while using his knowledge of the game has proven effective. The protagonist acknowledges Evan's efforts and tells him that he can finally rest. While eating the macarons, Evan asks whether that concludes all duties related to the orphanage. The protagonist confirms that it does. Hearing this, Evan feels a deep sense of relief. Lying on the ground and staring up at the blue sky, Evan asks whether the protagonist is happy. The protagonist answers that he is, though Evan points out that he does not look like it. The protagonist tries to force a smile by pulling at his cheeks, insisting that he is smiling. Internally, Evan decides to simply accept it as such. The protagonist stretches and then lies down beside him, staring upward. He admits to himself that he never expected things to go this smoothly. His thoughts drift back to the game. The bosses of Psychedelia became the 5 sins as a result of horrific past experiences. Even though this is the timeline before they became sins, the chances of saving all of them before those events occurred had been slim. He had been worried that he might rescue them only after they had already been broken. Returning to the present, the protagonist asks about the orphanage. Evan hands him a letter and reports that, as usual, things are going well. He adds that the children once looked like broken dolls, but they have brightened considerably. As the protagonist opens the letter, he comments that it seems unnecessary to hire a separate caretaker. Internally, he admits that he did not expect Yusha to handle things so well. After a brief pause, he wonders whether her background makes her more sentimental toward the orphanage. He concludes that she would likely dislike further interference. While reading the letter, he reflects quietly that Yusha is, in some ways, genuinely kind. Evan asks whether the letter contains anything important. The contents describe how everyone is doing well, that a few children in particular are growing steadily, that there is no need to worry about Deus, and that the other children are also doing fine. Images form of the orphanage children playing together, with Yusha gently guiding another girl by the hand. Back in the present, the protagonist closes his eyes and feels a quiet sense of relief. He is simply glad that they all appear to be growing up well. Reading further, he concludes that environment truly is the most important factor in shaping their futures. Evan steps closer and asks when the protagonist plans to meet the children. He reminds him that the protagonist always says the time will come. The protagonist hesitates, trails off, and then reflects internally that he does not plan on meeting them at all. Gripping his head, tears forming, he admits to himself that while staying close to them would be nice, their in-game personalities still frighten him. Perhaps this fear comes from how brutal the process of becoming Sins once was. Even though he rescued them before those events occurred, the fear has not completely faded. Covering his mouth, sweating slightly, he gives Evan a vague answer, suggesting that perhaps 5 years from now. Evan accepts this explanation without pressing further. The scene shifts to the protagonist's training. He creates 2 dark, crackling spheres of energy that hover in the air as the atmosphere around them churns violently. Internally, he reminds himself that regardless of everything else, he needs the skills to protect himself in this harsh world. Evan watches quietly, noting in his thoughts that magical talent is necessary for such feats, and that this body is exceptionally suited for it. He then asks whether the protagonist has heard of an organization known as the Blue Moon. The protagonist disperses the energy spheres and reacts with confusion, having never heard of them. Evan explains that the group has recently gained notoriety for dismantling criminal organizations. The protagonist absorbs the information calmly, thinking that cleaning up criminals is commendable work. Privately, he assumes that since he has never heard of them before, they will likely disappear soon. Evan hesitates and adds that the group has even been killing nobles. He had assumed the protagonist would already know. After a brief pause, the protagonist suddenly calls out to Evan and insists that he sleep near his room from now on. The scene shifts to the orphanage at night under a dark blue sky. Inside, a meeting is underway as a woman begins reviewing the Blue Moon's weekly report. It is revealed that the speaker is Yusha, who proceeds to ask about developments in the north. A girl with fox-like ears, golden short hair, and a tail responds with a smug expression, casually stating that she eliminated all the slave traders. She is revealed to be Sealrang, the sin of pride. Demonstrating her abilities, Sealrang leaps high into the air, boasting internally that none of her targets even realized who she was. While still airborne, she addresses another girl in a green dress who is quietly reading nearby, commenting arrogantly on her clothing and recalling how she spared no one who failed to answer her questions. The report continues under the glow of the blue moon. The girl in the green dress responds to Sealrang with an unusual expression, calmly stating that the corpses had melted. She is revealed to be Rinna, the sin of greed. The scene widens to show 2 boys who have also been present in the room. One stands quietly against the wall, while the other sits casually on the steps. The boy on the steps speaks up, directing his report to Rinna, stating that he has also finished handling the South. The focus shifts closer to him as he explains that he eliminated the illegal human testing grounds and dealt with the Avalon group that had been causing trouble. With a confident expression, he adds that he reduced them to nothing but minced remains. His identity is revealed as Raiden, the sin of misophobia, marked by his long white hair and glowing blue eyes. Yusha responds with approval, remarking that everything will proceed according to his will. Sealrang then declares loudly that they exist for the sake of the Great Moon. It becomes clear that they are members of a secret organization that worships the Great Moon, known as the Blue Moon. Suddenly, someone among them raises a concern, stating that there appears to be a problem. Yusha questions how there could be any issue when everything is proceeding perfectly under his will. A boy with short black hair steps forward, holding a letter. He explains that the head of Avalon is the eldest son of a count family, and that while cleaning up the South, he discovered a dangerous written order. After a brief pause, he adds that the eldest son appears to be targeting their leader. Yusha reacts with shock before composing herself and acknowledging the situation. A crimson, Mystical energy begins to radiate from her body, glowing like fire and illuminating the entire room. Seo Rang and Rinna instinctively react with fear, sweat forming on their faces as they look toward her. Yusha examines the letter more closely. It contains an order instructing that after the Count's death, poison should be administered slowly to kill him. Filled with restrained fury, Yusha crushes the paper in her hand. 2 years later, the scene shifts. The protagonist stands in his home alongside Evan and 4 servants. Before them lies the body of his father, Count Palacio, resting in a coffin. The protagonist states that his father has died. Inwardly, he reflects that while the official cause was heart failure, it was clear the death resulted from an overdose. From behind, Leo's shocked voice carries through the hall, reacting to news that the blue moon has struck again. Soldiers confirm that an attack occurred the previous night. Leo questions whether everyone was wiped out once more. Watching the exchange, the protagonist notes internally that people have become increasingly wary of the blue moon. As he leaves the funeral hall with Evan, he reflects that the Count's death ended quietly, without a single mourner. Leo watches them leave from the side, his gaze cold and sharp. The scene transitions to the protagonist's room. Evan asks what he plans to do next. The protagonist rummages through bags and trunks while Evan watches in confusion, wondering why so many bags have been prepared. The protagonist instructs Evan to get his belongings ready. Standing up, he hands Evan a bag and informs him that they are leaving. Evan reacts in disbelief, questioning whether he truly intends to run away. The protagonist clarifies that they are not leaving entirely, but heading downward. Evan lifts several bags and asks whether he means Rod Mill. The protagonist confirms, explaining that he has been planning to relocate to a small town south of Palacio called Rod Mill. As the carriage departs, Leo watches them from his window, anger etched across his face. Time passes quietly. The protagonist is shown cooking, flipping toast and omelets in the air, as he and Evan live peacefully and comfortably in Rod Mill. 3 days later, everything changes. The protagonist is once again standing in the funeral hall, clutching his head in disbelief and frustration. He realizes that he has returned, only to find himself attending his brother's funeral. Confused and shaken, he struggles to understand why his brother has already died, knowing the timing should have been different. Examining Leo's body, he concludes that the cause of death was a stab wound to the heart. He wonders who could have carried out the killing. As he attempts to question a servant about the cause of death, the servant reacts strangely, apologizing repeatedly for making eye contact. Another servant quickly pulls him away. The protagonist questions what is wrong, clearly unsettled. At that moment, Evan rushes over. The protagonist asks whether he has discovered anything. Evan hesitates before leaning in close, lowering his voice as he asks whether the protagonist was responsible for making Avalon disappear overnight. Hearing this, the protagonist glances toward the surrounding servants, confusion spreading across his face as he quietly questions the accusation. The scene shifts into the past, returning to the day Alan left for Rod Mill. The chariot departs from the Palacio estate, heading south. From inside the chariot, Evan calls out to the young master. Both Evan and the protagonist sit across from each other as the wheels roll forward. Evan suggests that it might be better to head to a city instead. The protagonist responds vaguely, clearly still thinking. Internally, he firmly rejects the idea. Rod Mill is the final destination he carefully planned. Saving the 5 great sins from misfortune and preventing the world's ruin all hinge on this decision. As he looks out at the passing scenery, he continues thinking that Rod Mill has no involvement in the original story. The Palacio Villa is also located there, making it the ideal place for a noble to live quietly. He resolves to take it easy and do absolutely nothing. Coming back to the present moment, he tells Evan that everything has a reason. Evan responds with annoyance, pointing out that the protagonist always says things like that when he is completely unbothered. The protagonist simply remarks that good things are great. Elsewhere, Leo stands at a window, watching the chariot disappear into the distance. Anger fills his thoughts as he debates whether to kill his brother. He concludes that it would not matter whether Alan lived or died, since he had already planned to poison him after their father's death. A man enters the room and bows respectfully, but Leo continues thinking. Alan had claimed he was quietly heading to the border, leaving Leo with no immediate reason to kill him. Still, unease lingers. Leo wonders whether the situation with Avalon is deteriorating. Gripping the railing tightly, he admits to himself that Alan simply irritates him. Leo finally gives an order, instructing the man, Alman, to follow the carriage. Alman asks whether this means he should kill the target. Leo reacts sharply, shocked by the question. He realizes that Alman has never questioned his commands before, making the sudden hesitation deeply unsettling. Alman stands before him, sword in hand. Leo angrily begins to shout that Alman's job is to obey orders, but before he can finish, the sword is driven straight into his chest. Leo gasps in agony, disbelief flooding his face as he tries to stop the blade from going any deeper. Struggling for breath, Leo demands to know how Alman could betray him. Alman responds calmly, saying that he enjoys playing war. As he presses the sword in further, he adds that it had been fun until now. It is then revealed that this man is not truly Alman, but Haydn, a member of the Blue Moon. Internally, Haydn reflects on the creed taught by the Red Moon. As the Blue Moon serves as that man's sword, it is only natural that he moves according to his wishes. He declares that if anyone attempts to harm the Great Moon, he will act on his own judgment. With brutal force, Haydn pulls the sword from Leo's chest, blood spraying across the room. Leo collapses, trembling in pain and disbelief. Haydn tells him that this is exactly why he had been waiting for Leo to say those words. He remarks that it took Leo 2 full years to finally speak them. Leo weakly claims that his subordinates will not allow Haydn to escape. Haydn replies with absolute confidence, stating that with Leo's words, Avalon will disappear from the continent forever. He adds quietly that it is unfortunate. Leaping out through the window, Haydn tells Leo that the Great Moon had given him chance. The scene shifts to Rodmill under a bright, peaceful morning sky. The protagonist wakes up in his bed and cheerfully greets the day. Internally, he thinks that Rodmill truly feels like heaven. Sitting up, he reassures himself that it is yet another peaceful day. The protagonist wakes with a cheerful expression, thinking about the freedom of his current life. He wakes whenever he wants and eats whatever he feels like. The scene shifts to the dining hall, where he and Evan enjoy breakfast together in a relaxed atmosphere. As he eats, he reflects on how he is finally living the life of a true noble. Tasting the toast he made himself, he briefly wonders whether opening a toast stand would actually be a good idea. Evan then takes out a letter and hands it to him. While still chewing, the protagonist reacts casually and opens it, wondering what it could be about. The moment he reads it, the toast slips from his hand. Fear flashes across his face as he realizes that his brief taste of freedom has come to an end after only 4 days. He explains that this is how he ended up returning to the Palatial estate. The scene shifts to the present, inside the funeral hall during Leo's funeral. Noticing the servants' strange behavior, the protagonist silently questions their reactions. Evan then asks him when he became the Shadow Leader, leaving him completely confused. As he processes everything, the protagonist realizes that he has somehow been placed in the center of an absurd chain of overlapping circumstances. He and Evan sit on a bench in a quiet corner of the funeral hall. With a heavy expression and tears welling in his eyes, he asks Evan to explain why he's been labeled the villain. Evan calmly explains that the protagonist is the only one who benefits from the current situation. After they left the estate, Leo was murdered, and the protagonist now possesses the perfect alibi to inherit the title of Count. The words leave him stunned. Evan continues, explaining that Avalon has completely disappeared, and with Leo gone, nothing stands in the protagonist's way anymore. The implication settles heavily in the air. Before the protagonist can respond, a servant approaches and formally identifies him as the Shadow Leader who orchestrated the assassination of a swordmaster. Confused and irritated, the protagonist questions the situation, his thoughts spiraling as he wonders where he could even begin to untangle this mess. No ordinary organization should be capable of eliminating a major underworld figure so quickly. He then recalls the existence of an organization known for hunting other organizations. Evan confirms that he is referring to the Blue Moon, but quickly clarifies that the Information Guild has ruled them out. The Blue Moon is known to leave behind a mark rather than corpses, whereas Avalon's members were clearly killed by sword wounds. Evan concludes that the road to hell has already been opened. Annoyed, the protagonist realizes this is why he is now being branded as the shadow leader responsible for killing a swordmaster. Internally, he rejects the idea that the blue moon is involved. In the original game, they vanish before the main story even begins. That leaves one unsettling question unanswered. The scene shifts to the orphanage, where Yusha calmly asks whether any traces were left behind. Rinna confidently reports that nothing remains. At the same time, Sealrang casually spins her knife, confirming the same, adding that only corpses were found. A new presence enters the room, reporting his return. The boy states that 486 soldiers of Avalon remain, exactly as instructed. Raiden then adds that he personally cut them all in half. Yusha reacts with quiet satisfaction. In her thoughts, she considers the outcome perfect. She reflects that Avalon, once a massive organization dominating the Asteria Kingdom, was reduced to nothing in just 5 days. Raiden then points out that the cleanup was not entirely flawless. When questioned, he presents a file containing information on nobles connected to Avalon, specifically highlighting the deep ties to the Altea Dukedom. After reading it, Yusha acknowledges that he already understands what must be done. Raiden agrees to handle the matter quietly. The scene opens with Yusha giving firm instructions, making it clear that everyone already understands what must be done. The group exchanges glances before Raiden responds with quiet confidence, indicating that he will handle the matter discreetly. Hearing this, Yusha finally allows herself a small moment of relief. Still holding the same file, she turns her attention to Rinna and confirms that the Information Guild's side has been properly cleaned. Rinna produces a letter to show her, while Sealrang attempts to snatch it away playfully. Rinna explains that the situation is being handled separately from the Blue Moon. The black-haired boy adds that all guilds behave similarly, referring to the so-called Hell sword created by the Swordmaster. Rinna asks whether she should continue monitoring movements. Yusha, clutching the file close to her chest, agrees without hesitation. She emphasizes that this matter must never reach the ears of that person, reminding them that this warning has already been repeated many times. The black-haired boy points out that since that person's family acted first, this was not an order. With unwavering resolve, he affirms that they exist as swords. Yusha responds sharply, reinforcing that a sword must never think for itself. Pointing toward the crescent blue moon, she stresses that the blue moon moves only by command and reminds them that that person knows everything. The room falls silent as fear spreads among them, sweat forming on their faces. After a brief pause, Yusha issues one final warning, telling them never to disappoint him. The black-haired boy watches her closely, confusion stirring within him. Despite Yusha's overwhelming abilities, she seems plagued by anxiety and restlessness, all stemming from her fear of being discovered. Pushing those thoughts aside, he takes the file from her and acknowledges the order. The scene shifts to the exterior of the orphanage. From within, voices echo with devotion to the great moon. The focus then returns to the protagonist, seated in his office and surrounded by stacks of documents, books, and scattered papers. Visibly exhausted, he reaches his limit. Tears spill from his eyes as he reflects on the month of relentless duties that followed the funeral, leaving him completely overwhelmed. All he wants is to laze around and eat, wondering if that isn't what nobles are supposed to do. His thoughts drift as he recalls that even though he has made enemies, Leo's death was not supposed to happen for another 6 years. However, because the order of the brothers' deaths changed the course of the game, all the accumulated family responsibilities fell onto him as the heir. A servant's voice interrupts his thoughts, and soon 5 servants enter the office carrying books, documents, and scrolls. The sight alone drains him further. As he watches them, he wonders why everyone is suddenly working so hard. When the Count was alive, they were known for slacking off and skipping duties. The servants, noticing the protagonist's unusual behavior, grow visibly nervous. One worries that he might be angry. Another resolves to work even harder. A third, overwhelmed by fear, simply hopes to survive. The protagonist, puzzled by their reactions, wonders if the rumors of him being a secret mastermind have made the staff overly strict and cautious. He questions why they hesitate to approach him when called, reflecting on how he is still, at heart, just a former slave who wants to do his job quietly. He wishes the staff would handle matters on their own without forcing him to intervene. The scene changes to an outdoor setting where meat and potatoes roast over an open fire. Evan approaches and addresses the protagonist. He remarks on how astonishing it is that the protagonist has reached the second tier after only 2 years of self-study in poisoncraft. Such progress usually requires 4 years of formal instruction, and magic itself often demands innate talent. The protagonist eats a roasted potato from a skewer while simultaneously practicing magic, forming faintly sparking electrical spheres. He casually acknowledges that his talent is fairly decent. Internally, he reflects that his intense training was driven by unease and a need for self-defense. Evan, observing closely, considers how controlling mana is essential for such progress. Meanwhile, the protagonist grows frustrated, realizing that half-baked ability offers little reassurance. Looking at the magical sphere hovering above his palm, he acknowledges that he has already experimented with nearly every type of magic in this fantasy world. At first, it had been exciting. He assures himself that if his plans succeed, nothing dangerous should happen, and that he can continue learning at a steady pace. Yet the truth soon surfaces in his mind. Despite all his effort, his mana haul is extremely small. Pointing toward the roof in frustration, he feels that nothing is working out. Recalling his experience from the game, he compares innate mana capacity to an athlete's natural weight class. No matter how much training he undergoes, his mana haul remains severely limited, and no amount of effort can truly compensate for it. After some time, as he continues sitting with Evan, a thought surfaces in his mind. If nothing else works, there's still one remaining method. Soon after, Evan presents him with a letter, revealing that an invitation to a ball has finally arrived. The protagonist is momentarily confused by the idea. The scene transitions to a grand royal hall filled with elite nobles attending the event. The protagonist enters alongside Evan and immediately feels drained by the atmosphere. This is revealed to be a regular aristocratic ball in the southern Asteria kingdom, meant for noble exchange and networking. Knowing he is soon to become a count, the protagonist considers using the opportunity to form connections. He adjusts his attire with seriousness, while Evan casually observes. As he walks through the hall, he reminds himself that noble connections are essential for a peaceful future. However, when he attempts to greet others, they recoil in fear and distance themselves from him. Evan reacts lightly, but the protagonist is unsurprised, knowing his reputation precedes him. He parts ways with Evan, aware that many nobles look down on him for his background and lack of refinement. He reflects on how the Palacio family has become infamous, unlike in his great-grandfather's era. Taking a glass of wine, he carefully observes its aroma and flavor, noting its distinct qualities and deciding he would like to keep some at home. He reminds himself that a gentle smile is a key social tool. However, his actions only seem to frighten others further, leading to misunderstandings and whispered rumors about his intentions. As Evan later rejoins him, casually enjoying the food, the protagonist realizes that the situation has completely deviated from his expectations. Evan notes how the protagonist's collection of gifts and goods has grown significantly. Despite studying wine seriously, the protagonist feels more isolated than ever. Watching nobles avoid him entirely, he reflects that his social life has effectively collapsed. Choosing to step away, he heads to the balcony for fresh air, while Evan remains behind. Alone on the balcony, the protagonist wonders where everything went wrong. Suddenly, a calm and refined presence approaches from behind. Surprised that someone would speak to him at all, he turns to see a young woman in a green dress with matching eyes. She introduces herself as Loria, the third daughter of Duke Altea. Recognizing the name, the protagonist immediately understands the significance. The Altea family is one of the 3 major shadow powers of Psychedelia, known as the Northern Troublemakers. With unease, he realizes there is no chance she is an ordinary noble. Searching his memories of the game, he finds no recollection of her presence at all. With visible hesitation, Loria makes a direct request, asking for his help. She then reveals, with quiet fear, that she is about to be assassinated. The scene continued on the balcony of the ballroom. Loria stood before the protagonist, openly pleading for his help and revealing that her life was in danger due to an impending assassination. The protagonist listened with a calm and unreadable expression, offering no immediate response. As Loria began explaining her background, the protagonist paid little attention to her words. Instead, he analyzed the situation internally, recognizing that she had been protected only because of her status as the Duke's illegitimate daughter. With Duke Altia's condition deteriorating, that protection was clearly fading. When Loria expressed fear that her older sisters would soon kill her, the conclusion became obvious to him. This was a mutual downfall scenario. He reflected on his past experiences with the game and realized why her existence felt unfamiliar. She must have already been dead before the relevant events ever unfolded, which explained her absence from his memories. When she tried to appeal to his strength and reputation, he calmly declined. Loria then attempted to negotiate, offering half of the Altia family's fortune in exchange for her survival. Despite sympathizing with her situation, the protagonist chose to leave. As he walked away, sweat forming on his face, he admitted to himself that he was in no position to help anyone. The rumors surrounding him exaggerated his influence, and giving her false hope would only make things worse. Before fully exiting, he paused briefly, offering her silent goodwill and hoping she would find a more reliable ally. Unbeknownst to him, two shadowy figures observed the exchange from above. They discussed how Altia had already made contact with the so-called Great Moon and noted that Loria was the only member of the Altia family not tied to Avalion. This distinction removed her from Raiden's list of targets. With that clarification, they decided to proceed according to the Red Moon's command, focusing on eliminating the remaining Altias and suppressing information so the Avalon matter would never reach the protagonist. Back inside the hall, the protagonist noticed the area around him had grown strangely empty. He wondered if something about him instinctively drove people away. At that moment, a woman in a red dress approached and greeted him. For a brief second, he believed this might finally be a normal social interaction. However, the moment he recognized her face, his expectations vanished. She was another shadow player, someone he clearly remembered from the game. The realization was immediate. No one approached him without a reason, and trouble always followed. He acknowledged her politely, addressing her by name, which visibly surprised her. Her reputation was well known across the kingdom. His mind raced as he recalled the three great shadow powers of the Asteria kingdom: Altia of the north, Palatio of the east, and Zenonia of the west. While Palatio operated like a violent gang, Zenonia was closer to a refined and highly organized criminal syndicate. Understanding exactly who stood before him filled him with unease. All he wanted was stability, a peaceful, noble life built on useful and safe connections. Even though his situation was already unraveling, getting involved with her would only accelerate the collapse. He maintained courtesy, complimenting her appearance with a slight bow. She responded warmly and expressed interest in continuing their conversation. Despite her invitation, the protagonist declined, remaining aware of the many eyes watching them from the hall. The protagonist felt a quiet sense of fear toward the woman in red. Internally, he wished only to be left alone and for the situation to pass without further complications. The woman, wearing a gentle smile, seemed amused by his reaction. She made a brief remark that aligned him with the rumors surrounding his name, then calmly expressed that she looked forward to meeting him again before walking away. Left behind, the protagonist remained confused, unable to grasp the meaning behind her words. Elsewhere, Rinne and Haydn remained positioned in the attic of the hall. Rinne confirmed that information regarding the Avalon case was being successfully contained. Haydn, however, raised a new concern. Someone else was still keeping watch over the protagonist. At that moment, a strange individual could be seen observing him from afar, perched silently on a tree branch outside a window. Back in the hall, the protagonist drank his wine with a troubled expression. The surrounding nobles continued to distance themselves from him, their fear evident. One of the men nearby sensed that they were being monitored. Meanwhile, Rinne and Haydn began moving across the attic to leave the hall. With no new orders issued, they resolved to continue surveillance before eliminating the observers. The scene later shifted to a canyon. Evan questioned whether this was truly the correct location, expressing unease at the unnatural darkness lingering inside, despite it being midday. The protagonist studied the terrain closely, tightening his fist as recognition set in. This was his true objective. The terrain matched perfectly, leaving no doubt. Evan nervously hoped their search would not be in vain again. The protagonist reassured him calmly, already recalling past experiences. In the game, this place had been easy to locate. His journey south under the pretense of attending the ball had always been about this location. Hidden within the canyon was the Labyrinth of Whispers, a structure containing 8 rooms filled with riddles. Solving them all granted a powerful artifact. Confident, the protagonist reflected on how thoroughly he had memorized every route and puzzle. It was finally time to put that knowledge to use. Standing before the entrance, he felt a quiet sense of awe. Seeing the labyrinth in reality felt different from experiencing it countless times in the game. The canyon's interior felt artificial, as though it had been deliberately constructed. Evan questioned how the protagonist even knew about such a place. The protagonist answered vaguely, implying prior familiarity. This shocked Evan, who struggled to understand how someone who rarely left the estate could possess such knowledge. Realizing his slip, the protagonist quickly brushed it off and encouraged them to move forward. As they advanced, flying beasts suddenly appeared, only to be crushed by enormous stone hands that descended from above. Evan was visibly shaken, recognizing that incorrect answers would result in merciless punishment. The protagonist, however, remained calm as he worked through the riddles. Evan watched in confusion, unable to comprehend how the young master could remain so composed. Despite working together for 4 years, he still could not discern any pattern in the protagonist's actions. His missions had always seemed random, eliminating criminal groups, repaying debts, saving orphans, aiding slaves, and delivering messages with no apparent meaning. Yet every action somehow led to a positive result. As the massive stone hands loomed nearby, Evan continued to wonder how the protagonist knew so much about this place despite rarely venturing beyond the estate. Soon after, the mechanism responded correctly, and the gate began to open once the process completed. Watching the entrance slowly open, Evan felt a growing sense of unease. He could not help but wonder what the protagonist was truly planning this time. As the beasts were crushed under the descending stone hands, blood and torn flesh splattered across the chamber. The protagonist forced himself not to look, feeling nauseated as the sight overwhelmed him. Relief only came when the door finally opened, confirming that the ordeal was over. Evan, watching the destruction come to an end, quietly relaxed as well, convinced that the danger had passed. Beyond the open door lay a vast chamber overflowing with treasure. Gold and valuables filled the space, and at the far end stood a small stone hand placed upon a table. Multiple rings adorned its fingers. The protagonist focused immediately on a single black ring, deciding that it was the only item worth taking. As he picked up the ring, Evan gathered a handful of gold bars, clearly puzzled by the choice. The protagonist dismissed the rest of the treasure, judging that taking anything else would only invite unnecessary trouble. Holding the black ring, the protagonist recognized it as the Oath of Restraint, the artifact he had been seeking. Confident that no danger awaited them on the way back, he proceeded toward the exit. Evan followed, still uncertain. As they left the treasure room, the protagonist reflected that navigating the labyrinth had been easy thanks to his knowledge of the game's route. Evan, however, sensed that something was wrong and suspected the protagonist had anticipated more than he let on. That suspicion proved correct. The rock piles scattered throughout the canyon began to shift, revealing themselves as golems. One after another, they rose from the stone, gripping sharp spears. Evan immediately assessed the situation as a worst-case scenario, preparing himself to fight while prioritizing the protagonist's safety. The protagonist stopped him and took responsibility for the threat himself. Evan was shocked, unable to understand why escape was not the first priority. Before further action could be taken, the protagonist struck the golems directly, making it clear that ordinary magic would not be enough. Turning his attention to the ring, the protagonist activated the artifact. As he raised his hand, a void opened in the sky. From within it came a presence that addressed him directly, recognizing him as one who carried a fragment of a greater will. The voice demanded 2 self-imposed restrictions in exchange for power. The protagonist recalled how this moment appeared in the game as a choice window, yet hearing a voice made the experience feel disturbingly real. Within the void, a faint human-like visage emerged, revealing the true nature of the Oath of Restraint. It was an absorption-type artifact that allowed its user to gain power by limiting themselves. Acknowledging this, the protagonist declared his first restriction. He would always perform the hand signs of Babylonia when casting magic. When asked what he desired in return, he requested greater authority to bend the laws of the world. The restriction was accepted. He then declared the second restriction, vowing to strictly chant the words of Babylonia whenever using magic. In return, he demanded even greater power to defy the world's laws. When no immediate response followed, doubt crept in. He reviewed every detail, confident that combining both restrictions granted the highest possible magical output. He had memorized every configuration through repeated gameplay. It had to work. At last, the voice confirmed the second grant. It acknowledged him as one who remembered the forgotten gestures and mysteries of a lost god and expressed gratitude toward him as an inheritor of that will. The meaning of those words confused the protagonist, but his attention shifted as the black ring on his thumb began to dissolve into his body. The absorption confirmed that the restriction had been successfully applied. The voice declared that it would continue to watch him before fading away. Time resumed. The golems were once again mid-motion, about to strike. Evan instinctively moved to shield the protagonist, convinced that second-tier magic would not be sufficient. Returning fully to the present, the protagonist summoned a sphere of lightning in his hand. Despite pouring all of his mana into it, the spell appeared weak and unimpressive. He acknowledged the truth calmly. No matter how much he trained, this had always been his limit. That realization was precisely why he had chosen to test the restriction and the price he had paid for it. As the protagonist prepared to attack, he formed a magical electric sphere between his hands. While doing so, he focused inward, deciding that this was the moment to test the restriction and the price he had paid for it. He began chanting measured words while performing precise hand gestures, steadily reinforcing the spell. With each incantation and movement, the small sphere of electricity expanded, growing larger and denser. The magic intensified until the sphere became massive, surging forward and engulfing the golems in its path. The destructive force pulverized the stone constructs completely. Columns shattered into fragments, and the remains were reduced to dust that scattered across the cavern. Evan watched in stunned silence, unable to process what he had just witnessed. As they moved through the debris of broken stone and collapsed golems, Evan could not hide his disbelief. He wondered whether the protagonist had been concealing his true strength all along. The protagonist denied it calmly, stating that what had just occurred was not something he himself had anticipated. Evan, still shaken, reflected on his 15 years as a mercenary and acknowledged that he had never seen anything like it before. He questioned whether such power could truly be attributed to second circle magic. The protagonist confirmed that it was. Privately, the protagonist revisited his past experiences with the game. What had happened differed greatly from how things worked there. In the turn-based battle system of Dealer, magic could be enhanced incrementally each turn through hand signs or incantations, each providing a modest increase in power. This time, however, he had reinforced the chain lightning spell through multiple layers of incantations and gestures, effectively stacking enhancements over several cycles. What he had executed was equivalent to configuring a large-scale lightning spell rather than a basic one. Beyond that, his newly imposed restrictions required him to always use both hand signs and incantations when casting magic. Combined, those limitations appeared to amplify the spell repeatedly, far beyond what he had expected. As they exited the cave, the protagonist reflected soberly on the outcome. Even second circle magic had proven excessive under these conditions. The result had surpassed his expectations and genuinely caught him off guard. Evan, equally drained, felt a sense of relief as they finally emerged from the canyon. Exhaustion caught up to him, and he sat down on a nearby rock, finding the experience more tiring than the battle itself. He wondered who could have created such an unpleasant place. The protagonist paused, considering something he had not thought about before. The Maze of Whispers had another name. The dungeon's layout and strategies had once circulated on community forums, where players frequently referred to it by a different title. Palaeon. According to developer commentary, the maze belonged to someone by that name. Because the dungeon allowed infinite retries without penalty, it eventually became known as the Maze of Palaeon. He muttered this realization aloud without much thought. Evan reacted with confusion, prompting the protagonist to change the subject. He pulled Evan up by the arms and urged him forward, directing their focus toward returning east. He acknowledged Evan's efforts over the past 3 weeks and mentioned that there was something he intended to do once they returned. With that, the two of them continued onward, leaving the labyrinth behind. As they continued walking, Ivan reflected inwardly, realizing that the young master was far more diligent than his appearance suggested. While supporting Ivan as they moved, the protagonist recalled his past experiences in detail. In the game's mechanics, choosing a hand sign that matched a spell's attribute increased its power, while selecting the correct incantation enhanced the spell's properties. That was how it had always worked. In the game, however, the visuals never changed, and only numerical values increased. This time was different. With each incantation, the spell itself had visibly altered in shape. The protagonist considered this carefully. Even though his mana pool was undeniably small, it was possible that his precise control over mana allowed him to perceive and induce these transformations more clearly than others. When they reached their horses, he decided that further testing would be necessary once his mana had fully recovered. For now, it was enough that everything had ended safely. From a distance, a figure concealed in darkness observed them. The watcher was Rina. She leapt toward the cave wall and examined the ancient calligraphy carved into it. The glyphs belonged to the era of the forgotten outer gods, written in the language of the Alanef Empire. The inscription spoke of a friend left behind by the coward Palaeon. As Rina studied the text, fragments of ancient history surfaced in her mind. The figure praised in the inscription was the brilliant emperor known as Palaeon the Great, the one who had halted the invasion of the Black Entities and stood victorious against Alakalaka, the devourer of citizens' hearts. Rina possessed this knowledge because she had been born with the ancient library, a gift granted alongside her great mission. She quietly connected the realization. The one who had created the maze was indeed Palaeon. Her thoughts returned to the protagonist. She had suspected his uniqueness ever since the Bloody Queen began following him, something found only in historical records. Still, she had not expected the Great Moon to be connected to Palaeon himself. Even more unsettling was the phrase he had whispered earlier, one that did not exist anywhere in the ancient library. She questioned what he truly was. Exiting the cave, Rina clasped her hands near her chest, feeling a mixture of humility and embarrassment. The Red Moon had been right, and she realized she had been following orders too blindly. Her attention shifted as Haydn appeared beside her. He confirmed that he had come for information, but reported instead that the Dark One was dead. The death had been abrupt, with the head twisting unnaturally in midair. Rina acknowledged that the incident would need to be formally reported for further processing. Soon after, the two vanished into the air, leaving the area behind. The scene shifted to Zenonia County. Lady Zenonia sat on an ornate couch, quietly drinking tea. She reflected that the rumors had not been exaggerated. The protagonist's demeanor had been chillingly emotionless, his gaze resembling an abyss. She found it strange that he had referred to her as famous, despite her complete absence from social activities. She approached her father, who was seated at a desk, and shared her thoughts. Her father dismissed the matter, reminding her that she was the count. Internally, she smiled, knowing that he had long since become her puppet and that she was the true head of the household. What unsettled her was how the protagonist had seen through this arrangement so easily. She recalled their earlier exchange and realized that he had noticed the observers she had assigned to watch him. A servant suddenly rushed into the hall and urgently summoned her. When she followed him to her room, they discovered the corpse of the Dark One. His neck had been twisted, blood staining the floor. The servant noted that the seal had not activated, meaning no secrets had been revealed. Lady Zenonia understood immediately that the body had been placed there deliberately. She smiled faintly, wondering how the perpetrator had uncovered the truth so precisely. She recognized that the protagonist had identified one of her greatest weaknesses the moment they met. The scene shifted once more. The protagonist and Ivan, exhausted from their recent ordeal, sat quietly in their chariot as they made their way back, the aftermath of the labyrinth still lingering in their thoughts. The Altea ducal estate as Loria's chariot approaches the palace gates. Seated inside, she reflects on the events of the past. She acknowledges that the man she met was not someone to underestimate, a distinguished figure of the underworld with cold eyes reminiscent of her father's. He was the kind of person she could never afford to make an enemy of. He had been her final lifeline, yet she understood why he would not accept a deal that guaranteed significant losses. Her thoughts turned to her situation. Her siblings, Tamalian, Marianne, Pyron, and Keeg, had stripped her of all assets and authority. She had nothing left. Until now, she had survived only because of her father's affection and protection, but she no longer knew how to proceed. As she steps down from the chariot and walks toward the palace entrance, servants rush toward her in visible panic. She learns that Pyron and Keeg are dead, reported as having taken their own lives. The news leaves her stunned. The idea that those who would readily betray their own family had chosen death makes no sense to her. Her thoughts immediately shift to Tamalian and Marianne. Moments later, the servants reveal the horrifying sight. The two eldest siblings standing before one another, swords driven through each other's chests. Loria freezes, unable to comprehend what she is seeing. High above the estate, a shadowy figure moves silently across the rooftops. The figure is Deus, observing the estate from a distance. With the task complete, he departs. Back within the estate, chaos spreads as servants flee in panic. Loria remains where she stands, recalling a brief moment from the past when the protagonist told her that good things would happen. A realization settles in. The one she had met was the true mastermind of his household, someone who hid his claws until the precise moment to seize power. Fear and understanding intertwine as she grasps the meaning behind his words. Overnight, she has become the sole successor of the ducal family. The weight of it terrifies her. She questions what kind of being she has aligned herself with, yet accepts that there is no path backward. Too many examples already exist of what happens to those who betray him. Steeling herself, she resolves to walk the path she has chosen. 2 months later, the scene shifts to the protagonist's palace. A servant from the Altea estate enters his office carrying a box, bowing respectfully as he delivers it under Duke Altea's order. The name catches the protagonist off guard. When the box is opened, its contents are revealed to be an expensive bottle of Cernance wine. Evan reacts with surprise at the rarity and value of the gift. Inside the box, the protagonist also finds a note written with courtesy by Loria Altea. He realizes that the gift was prepared by Loria herself, not her father, and feels a twinge of guilt for having been unable to help her directly. Seeking confirmation, he questions whether the gift was truly meant for him. The servant confirms that the Duke personally ordered its delivery. The realization strikes him. If Loria issued the order, then she has become the Duke. The scene shifts back to the Altea estate, now showing Loria at work in her office. Exhausted, she stretches and reflects on how quickly 2 months have passed. Following her father's death from illness and the succession ceremony, she ascended as Duke. She notes how she was once forbidden from even entering this office. Her thoughts return to the sudden deaths of her siblings. Despite everything, suspicion never fell on her. She had a solid alibi, attending the ball at the time. Her secret organization had already been destroyed by her siblings, leaving her genuinely powerless upon returning home. Later, she realizes how carefully everything had been arranged. He declined her request openly, yet handled all necessary matters behind the scenes. She wonders how far into the future he had calculated his moves. She never even informed him of her father's funeral, unwilling to burden him. As she walks through the halls, she reasons that he must need Altea for a larger plan. Even after unifying the remaining subordinate organizations, her power still pales in comparison to his. What she possesses, however, is the ability to manipulate politics from the shadows. He needs the Altea name. Stopping before a portrait of her ancestor, she resolves to focus on her responsibilities. She knows the Distinguished One will contact her soon. A small smile appears as she hopes he appreciated her gesture of gratitude. The scene returns to the protagonist's office as the Altia's servant takes his leave. The protagonist remains deep in thought, unable to reconcile how Loria went from facing death to becoming Duke in such a short time. Nearby, Evan observes him with confusion, sensing that something about the situation is deeply unsettling. A few months later, 5 years before the original story begins, inside the protagonist's house, he stood alone in a quiet room with a blank expression. Evan soon entered, acknowledging the passage of time and the weight of the title that was slowly becoming his. Although the succession ceremony had not yet taken place, a full year had already passed, making the situation feel inevitable. The protagonist reflected inwardly. Becoming a count had never been part of his original plan. He had once imagined a comfortable life, avoiding succession conflicts, settling matters in Rodmill, and eventually setting out on a leisurely gourmet journey. However, after living this life for some time, he had grown accustomed to it. As a noble, the balance between work and rest turned out to be better than expected, and he began considering how to make the most of it. Evan handed him a letter from Yusha. The protagonist accepted it quietly and moved with Evan into another room. As they settled down, his thoughts briefly returned to the unresolved matter of Leo's assassination. No concrete information had surfaced yet, though the Information Guild was still investigating and patience was required. While opening the letter, Evan wondered about the protagonist's next objective. The protagonist, however, was already deep in thought. Any deviations from the original game were likely the result of his own presence, subtle butterfly effects that could not be ignored. Rather than seeking revenge, his focus was on preparing for unexpected events. The letter rested in his hands as he wondered what Yusha had written this time. As he read, he imagined the scenes described within. Everyone at the orphanage was doing well, each absorbed in their own hobbies. Deus had refined his puppet shows to a professional level. Sealrang enjoyed playing games with friends. Rina spent her days quietly reading and crafting small items. Raiden had taken up gardening. This routine exchange of monthly letters had become familiar, warming his heart more with each passing time. Though he had never seen their faces, knowing they were growing up well brought a natural smile to him. As he continued reading, his thoughts shifted to their ages. The children were now old enough to step into society. Some had already left the orphanage, and those he had specifically ordered to be saved had reached that same stage. Near the end of the letter, a simple message of gratitude stood out. It struck him all at once that the time had come. It was time to let them go. Evan was surprised by the realization, recalling that they had once been gathered together because of their wounds. But there was no longer a reason for that. They were grown now, and their futures lay ahead of them. The protagonist reflected seriously on the care he had given them, believing he had done enough to prevent them from awakening as deadly sins. With their health restored, there was no need to hold them back any longer. His memories returned to the game's past. Each major boss had once been introduced through narration, their talents clearly defined. Yusha possessed the talent of faith. Deus had talent with the sword. Rina excelled in study. Sealrang had the disposition of a fighter. Raiden carried the talent of an apostle. Returning to the present, the protagonist took out a box and considered his plan. If each of them used their talents in the right fields, they would be more than fine. It seemed like a perfectly reasonable outcome. With renewed focus, he picked up a pen and decided to prepare a gift for each of them, something he had planned to do regardless. Hours passed as he finished writing the letters. When he finally stood up, tired but satisfied, Evan was startled awake from his nap. After a brief farewell, Evan left. The protagonist watched him go, quietly wondering whether he might one day receive something in return once the children grew into influential figures. With that thought, he hoped they would read his letters and step confidently into the world. The scene shifted to the orphanage. Yusha stood before the children, informing them that new orders had arrived. This time, each letter had been delivered individually. As the letters were handed out, everyone stared at them in confusion. Sealrang reacted with visible excitement, while the others remained serious. Yusha herself looked at the letters with a composed, thoughtful expression. After receiving the letters, Yusha realized internally that the orders had arrived. Unlike before, they had been delivered to each of them individually. Sealrang reacted with visible excitement upon receiving her letter, while the others stared at theirs with serious expressions. Before allowing anyone to proceed further, Yusha made sure everyone reviewed the previous letters as well, since the orders required a high level of understanding. Seol Rang reacted playfully, surprised that everyone was now allowed to read them, as only Yusha had been permitted to do so before. Yusha understood that this change meant he had decided it was time for everyone to be fully aware of the contents. As Seol Rang read her letter, she realized that what seemed ordinary at first glance was actually an order. Rina, on the other hand, noted that it looked like nothing more than casual daily conversation. Yusha clarified internally that the orders had been disguised as ordinary exchanges from the very beginning. The structure was always the same: a greeting, followed by the designation of a target, the mission itself, and instructions to report afterward. This was also when the Blue Moon had been entrusted to her. Every one of them had been personally chosen. Deus understood that this method existed to prevent information leaks, and recalled his own first order. Yusha emphasized the importance of clearly understanding the orders and carrying out the missions accordingly. The others questioned internally whether meeting in person or using magical communication would be more efficient, especially if secrecy was the goal. However, Yusha remained unwavering. All that mattered was following the orders exactly as given. Deus felt a chilling sense of trust behind that attitude, but accepted it without objection. With shared resolve, they proceeded to read their individual letters. Deus learned that he was being sent to Caliban, the nation of knights. Seol Rang discovered that her destination involved a desert region, which she disliked. Raiden was assigned to Raxas, the entertainment city, while Rina was instructed to head to Larthania, the maze city. Yusha confirmed her own destination as the Holy Kingdom of Rosario and ensured that each person's task was clearly written in their letter. Deus noted that he had been ordered to become a knight, though the reason was unclear. Seol Rang realized that continued patronage had been guaranteed. Rina discovered that the letters also revealed the locations of their gifts. Raiden accepted that the nature of those gifts would only become clear upon arrival. Before they departed, Yusha reminded everyone that unless instructed otherwise, the name of the Blue Moon was never to be mentioned. Soon after, they all left the orphanage. 3 months later, the scene shifted to the protagonist's office. He sat quietly, reading through a book. After finishing, he reflected that there was still no recorded information regarding the changes in magic and phrasing, meaning he would need to experiment personally. He then turned his attention to Ivan, who was gathering books from a shelf, and checked on the progress of the investigation into Leo's assassination. The results remained empty. Internally, the protagonist acknowledged that the butterfly effect had spiraled beyond his expectations. Saving the 5 deadly sins had altered the flow of events significantly. Even Loria, who should have died in the original story, had risen to become Duke Altia, rapidly expanding her power and influence throughout the underworld. After placing the book down, he decided to halt the investigation entirely. Ivan was left confused by that sudden decision. With a serious expression, the protagonist reflected inwardly. This was clearly a situation where ignorance was preferable. Within this world, almost nothing could escape the Information Guild's network. Even attempting to investigate matters that should remain untouched would only invite consequences in return. If taking precautions against unforeseen situations led to death, then those precautions were meaningless. In the end, secret organizations like that would not harm him as long as he did not interfere with their affairs. There was no reason for them to attack unless he approached them first. Snapping out of his thoughts, he concluded that continuing the investigation served no purpose. Ivan accepted the decision and prepared to inform the guild to stop their efforts. After a brief pause, Ivan delivered another piece of information. Deus had recently been appointed as a knight in Caliban. The news surprised the protagonist, though he acknowledged it positively. 3 months later, the protagonist sat on a bench outdoors in the city while Ivan brought him meat skewers. Ivan informed him that Deus had formed an entire knight order. The revelation shocked the protagonist. Achieving such a feat meant Deus had reached at least an expert level or higher, and it had not been long since his initial appointment. Rumors had already begun circulating that the world would witness the 5th Master Knight within the next 10 years. The protagonist imagined what that title meant and felt a quiet sense of pride. Caliban itself had become noisy due to this development. 6 months later, inside the protagonist's residence, he practiced magic while reflecting that an entire year had passed since the 5 deadly sins left the orphanage, and he had gradually grown accustomed to the responsibilities of being a count. Ivan suddenly arrived with urgent news. Deus had become a Sword of Caliban, making him the fifth Master Knight. The information left the protagonist momentarily unable to process it. Only sword masters were supposed to reach that rank, individuals who had surpassed the Aura Blade and unlocked a unique ability known as derivation. Yet Deus had reached this position without completing that final step. Ivan clarified that Deus was on the verge of becoming a true sword master. Although he had not yet created his derivation, the nation granted him the title regardless. He had already won a duel against the fourth sword, and Caliban had recently lost a Master Knight to the northern barbarians after more than a decade of war. The protagonist recalled how long it normally took to achieve such heights. Manipulating mana alone required 15 years, and derivation demanded decades. Reinhardt, the first sword, had become the youngest Master Knight in history at the age of 32. Memories from the game surfaced. Reinhardt had been overwhelmingly powerful, and even with exceptional talent, it had taken him over 20 years. Yet Deus, a child who once had no knowledge of swords, had already reached the level of a Master Knight. As the realization settled in, the protagonist considered that Deus might already be surpassing Reinhardt, simply waiting to complete his derivation. The thought crossed his mind that he might be able to rely on Deus sooner than expected, or perhaps not at all. Ivan, sensing the implication, dismissed the idea internally. The protagonist then reviewed the letters he had received. They came only from Yusha, even after she moved to the Holy Kingdom. Her letters consistently included updates about the other deadly sins, suggesting they continued to stay in touch. A hint of sadness crossed his thoughts. Despite never having seen his face, they could at least have acknowledged the gifts he sent. Still, he reminded himself that he was more than grateful they had not awakened as true calamities capable of destroying kingdoms. Standing near the window, he found comfort in knowing they were doing well. The scene shifted to the capital of Caliban, the central area of Kurtham. Within the residence of a high-ranking noble stood the grand mansion of the illustrious solar eclipse knights. Outside, swordsmen trained relentlessly. Near a window stood a boy clad in legendary knight armor, Deus Michaelian, captain of the solar eclipse knights and the youngest Master Knight. As he looked outside, a girl arrived and waved toward him. He returned the gesture with a bright smile. Soon after, Deus reflected quietly on the past. A full year had passed, yet the memories still embarrassed him. Losing everything to the black creatures had left him with nothing but uncontrollable rage and hatred. Being saved by the Great Moon alone had not been enough to swear allegiance. However, the promise of avenging everything with his own hands had bound him to the Blue Moon. Working under the Blue Moon had subjected him to countless dangerous missions and relentless training. He had paid little attention to his own well-being, carrying out tasks that would later form the foundation of his fight against the black creatures. Eventually, he received a personal order for the first time. It came suddenly, accompanied by a gift that initially stirred no excitement. He had wondered what it could possibly be. That letter revealed the truth. The gift from the Great Moon was the family he believed he had lost forever, something more precious to him than his own life. The realization struck Deus clearly. The younger sister he had believed to be dead was alive. The scene shifted into the past, to the moment he finally met her again. Upon confirming her survival, his composure collapsed, and tears flowed uncontrollably. Overwhelmed by emotion, he struggled to process what had happened to her after they were separated. After wiping the tears from her eyes, the two of them sat together at a table, sharing tea. His sister calmly recounted everything she had endured. After being taken away from him, she had been forced to remain in darkness for a long time, waiting endlessly for her turn. When a moment finally came for her to be killed, she managed to escape with the help of light and survived. Years later, when she was on the verge of being sold to a slave merchant, a mercenary named Evan intervened and saved her. She then approached a cupboard, opened a drawer, and retrieved something she had kept carefully. She explained that afterward, she had received precious medicine and continued protection from a sponsor. Inside the drawer was a note confirming that she would receive medicine and support, assuring her safety under the name of Palatio and stating that her sibling would also be protected. She expressed her deep gratitude for everything that had been done for her. Upon reading the note, Deus was shaken. The realization that someone had protected his sister using their own name left him stunned. As memories resurfaced, Deus reflected inwardly. He had never told anyone about his family. Even Yusha had only noticed that the black creatures had taken him, nothing more. Yet everything now aligned perfectly. The lingering questions he had carried for so long suddenly fit together and vanished. He finally understood the anxiety Yusha had once shown. He realized how foolish he had been to believe that a sword could not think for itself. The words spoken to him in the past resurfaced with new meaning. They had not been empty encouragement. Everything had already been known, and those words had been a quiet hint left for the child who would survive alone. Despite acting independently, the one behind it all had chosen generosity and mercy instead of punishment. While Deus had been consumed by hatred and thoughts of revenge against the black creatures, the survival of his family had been a gift beyond measure. He now understood why Yusha followed that man so unwaveringly. It was not blind faith nor fanaticism. There was reason behind it. A debt had been incurred, and it had to be repaid. His mission became clear. He would rise to the pinnacle of Caliban as a master knight and form a personal knight order filled with the finest swordsmen. The scene returned to the present. Deus stood near a window when a soldier arrived and respectfully notified him that the time had come. Deus moved through the hallway alongside the soldier, where a group of knights awaited his command. Drawing his sword, he steeled himself. This expedition would serve as the first stepping stone for the solar eclipse. No hardship ahead mattered to him. He awaited the day he could offer his gratitude, along with recompense worthy of what he had received. Soon after, the solar eclipse knights departed on an expedition to battle against the barbarians. The scene shifted to the protagonist's house. He sat on the floor, reading through stacks of books. Leaning against a pillar with his eyes closed, a sense of quiet settled over him. The atmosphere felt peaceful, likely because the children he had raised were no longer under his roof. They had all grown up and flown away on their own paths. As his thoughts drifted, his attention returned to his notes, where the cursive handwriting bothered him more than expected. He made a mental note to write more clearly in the future. After returning from the labyrinth, he had devoted himself entirely to researching magic phrases. His reports were finally complete. His notes detailed the behavior of each phrase. Refraction reinforced imperfections within a completed spell, causing its range to spread. Retraction crushed form and altered the nature of a projectile. Repulsion destroyed structure and affected the transition of the released mana. Blue light reinforced parallel magic, particularly electrical magic. Line of diffraction granted penetration, resulting in a critical effect. There were strict rules. Phrases could not be mismatched or repeated, and no more than 4 could be used at once. With his limited mana pool, he could only cast a single spell per day, which made the research slow and demanding. In this world, the hand signs and phrases of Babylonia had long been forgotten, leaving no written records behind. With no references available, he had been forced to uncover everything on his own. Despite learning magic purely for self-defense, he found unexpected enjoyment in the process. After preparing himself, he began practicing the magic he had developed over the past 2 months. As he worked, his thoughts focused on the structure of mana. By eliminating the focal point of the mana sphere and inducing imbalance, lightning could be sparked. What initially appeared to be weak and worthless magic began to change as phrases were applied. Fixation and compression altered its stability, while breakdown caused the spell to fester toward a clear purpose, eventually blooming into something fleeting but powerful. A large sphere of energy formed before him. Observing it closely, he realized that the order of phrases mattered. When breakdown had been applied first in earlier attempts, the spell had failed entirely. In the midst of his practice, a sudden presence appeared behind him, startling the observers who had just arrived. The protagonist turned instantly. Kalia had entered the area with an elderly companion. Both were visibly shaken by what they were witnessing. The old man, in particular, reacted with fear upon seeing the magic being used, recognizing it as something far beyond ordinary spellcasting. The explanation he overheard only deepened the protagonist's confusion. The term origin magic echoed in his thoughts, along with the implication that such power belonged to a mage of an entirely different caliber. The realization left him unsettled as he questioned the meaning of what he had just demonstrated. The scene shifted to Count Palacio's mansion reception room. Inside the room, Kalia and her companion sat quietly on a sofa. Kalia maintained a serious expression as her thoughts organized themselves clearly. She had come for 2 reasons. The first was to confirm Count Palacio's intentions, as he possessed a wild card capable of inflicting significant damage on Zenonia. The second was to gauge the level of the organization protecting him, which had enabled him to gain control over Palacio. However, what she had learned far exceeded those expectations. Her gaze shifted to her companion, who was trembling uncontrollably. The sight unsettled her. Vinecoal, a six-circle mage expelled from the Magic Tower for inhumane experiments, was someone capable of annihilating an entire division of soldiers on his own. Despite his long-standing arrogance, even toward her as a sponsor, fear was now unmistakable in his demeanor. She had never seen him like this before. The thought that what she had witnessed might truly have been origin magic refused to leave her mind. Soon after, the protagonist entered the room. He clarified the misunderstanding without hesitation. What he had used was not origin magic. If his abilities were to be categorized, he belonged only to the second circle. The magic he demonstrated lacked both offensive and defensive applicability, something any competent mage should have noticed. Internally, he acknowledged the limitation of that spell, recognizing its impracticality in real combat situations. Both Kalia and her companion struggled to process what that explanation implied. Kalia immediately decided that what they had witnessed must remain unspoken. Her companion followed suit, retracting his earlier reaction and presenting himself with forced composure. Kalia observed this change closely. Seeing Vinecoal behave with restraint and deference was deeply unnatural. The protagonist felt relieved as the misunderstanding appeared to settle. With the issue addressed, attention shifted to the purpose of Kalia's visit. She revealed that she had come only after finishing her affairs nearby, without a specific reason tied directly to him. The protagonist accepted this explanation, but made it clear that he could not spare much time, as work awaited him. Kalia stood and prepared to depart, expressing formal gratitude for the meeting. Before they left, the protagonist suggested that if she ever needed someone to speak with, she should visit Duchess Althea instead. He believed the two would get along well. Kalia accepted the suggestion politely, her expression calm as she departed with her companion. Near the mansion's entrance, the protagonist and Ivan watched as Kalia's chariot disappeared into the distance. Ivan questioned why a fallen Western family like Zenonia would involve itself here. The protagonist admitted he could not understand it either. Privately, concern crept in. If rumors spread that he had used origin magic, challengers seeking powerful opponents would inevitably begin to target him. In a world like this, such misunderstandings could easily spiral into disaster. As he walked away from the gate, he hoped his intentions had been understood. There was no reason for Zenonia to involve itself with Althea, a rival rising rapidly within the underworld. Above all, he wished to avoid becoming a focal point. Inside the moving chariot, Kalia revisited the question in her mind, turning to her companion for confirmation. Vinecoal denied that what they had seen was origin magic. Origin magic was the power to impose one's own laws upon absolute, immutable principles, a privilege reserved for the very pinnacle of mages. What the protagonist had used was fundamentally different. Using his observing eye, Vinecoal had seen something far more disturbing. The protagonist had not drawn upon the canvas of magic, he had torn it apart. He had twisted absolute laws, fixated lightning itself, collapsed its governing principles, and yet the spell still manifested. It was not a rewriting of laws, but the violation of them. What had occurred was an impossible miracle. The old companion showed clear fear as fragments of forgotten memory surfaced. Whatever he had sensed went far beyond ordinary ancient magic. The presence he recalled was tied to the great forgotten god itself, and even thinking about it caused his body to tremble. Realizing the danger, he forced himself to stop, knowing that dwelling on it any further could harm him. Despite his condition, he gathered enough composure to warn Kalia. During his younger years, he had immersed himself deeply in forbidden knowledge and was once praised for his research into the magic of the Forgotten Era. Because of that experience, he understood the weight of what stood behind Count Palacio. Opposing such a figure was not something to be taken lightly. Kalia listened with a faintly amused expression, interpreting his warning as confirmation that she herself was far too insignificant to grasp the true intentions behind such a being. However, her thoughts soon returned to the advice she had received earlier about visiting Duchess Althea. As that memory surfaced, irritation followed, and she acknowledged to herself that she had already become part of someone else's scheme. 5 months passed, marking nearly 2 years since the children had left the orphanage. Inside the protagonist's office, Evan arrived with new information. It was unrelated to the children, but far more troubling. Zenonia County and the Altea Duchy had formed an alliance. The realization struck hard, as those two powers stood at the very top of the underworld. Such an alliance was concealed due to an underworld convention, making it impossible for outsiders to detect, but Evan was confident in its authenticity. The protagonist felt a growing sense of unease. His previous efforts had redirected the Sins away from their original path, yet now two masterminds had joined forces. He questioned whether the Asteria kingdom itself was drifting toward collapse. His thoughts then turned back to Kalia, wondering if she had truly acted on his earlier suggestion. After brief consideration, he dismissed it as likely temporary, believing that someone as cold and arrogant as Kalia would never fully cooperate. Still, preparation was necessary. He took out a sheet of paper and began writing a letter, choosing his words carefully. He acknowledged that his previous behavior may have appeared blunt and distant, attributing it to his own difficulty with expressing himself. After finishing, he hesitated, hoping the letter would not be misunderstood as an excuse. The letter was entrusted to Evan, who planned to deliver it through the Mercenary Guild and also continue monitoring the children. Left alone, the protagonist leaned back in a chair, weighed down by concern. His thoughts turned to Raiden and Sealrang, from whom he had received no news since Yusha confirmed their arrival. He worried about her survival and hoped she had found the gift mentioned in the letter. If she had, she would eventually rise to the pinnacle of all fighters, becoming the Baba Yaga. The item he had given carried immense significance. It enhanced critical combat ability and represented a path that could have prevented corruption had it been obtained earlier by another bearer. Instead of falling, its rightful owner could have become a true Wolfkin leader. Staring out the window toward the sky, he reflected on how he had revealed the location of hidden treasures meant to serve as emergency funds. Trusting in her talent, he believed she would survive on her own. The land she had gone to was known as the Nation of Fighters, where strength alone determined one's fate. The scene shifted to the desert colony nation. Deep within a massive cave, Sealrang searched tirelessly until she finally discovered the equipment she sought. Completing the trial marked a turning point. As she examined the item, gratitude filled her, realizing that what she once believed to be a legend was real. Her thoughts drifted back to childhood stories told by her mother, who had spoken of the Golden Mane tribe, ancestors of the Wolfkin and rulers among beastkins. Those memories reinforced the truth of what she now held in her hands. The essence of the Golden Mane tribe was a legendary inheritance passed down for centuries, granting both power and authority. Sealrang had passed every inner-world trial and obtained it with her own strength. She acknowledged the Great Moon as her benefactor, the one who saved her from dying during bioexperiments and granted her the power to seek vengeance against the black dragon responsible for her parents' deaths. As she assessed her newfound power, she resolved to repay that favor. Mediocrity was not an option. Her path forward was clear. She would become the strongest gladiator, gather the scattered remnants of the Golden Mane tribe, and one day slay the black dragon. Stepping out of the cave, she gazed up at the blue moon, her resolve unwavering. Everything she did from this point onward was for that purpose. With determination set, she moved forward, believing that beneath the blue moon, the Golden Mane tribe would rise again after 500 years. The scene shifted to the protagonist's house, where he and Evan were seated together. Evan recalled that the Information Guild had recently gathered news about the children. He had intended to mention it earlier at the training grounds, but had forgotten. The protagonist focused on the update, prompting Evan to continue. According to the report, Sealrang had been performing exceptionally well in the colony and had earned herself the alias known as Golden Flash. The name caught the protagonist slightly off guard, but he felt relieved knowing that she was doing well. Evan added that in that land, strength alone was enough to become anything. The conversation then turned to Raiden. The protagonist noted that he had not received any word since Raiden mentioned learning how to work in Raxus. Evan explained that some information did exist, but it was still undergoing verification. The protagonist acknowledged this and then shifted the topic, questioning whether Evan should already be occupied with other preparations. Evan reacted awkwardly, confused by the sudden scrutiny, as he had already completed everything he was instructed to do. The protagonist calmly reminded him that the upcoming journey required preparation, as reaching the Magic Tower would take at least a month. This revelation irritated Evan, who had never heard of such a destination before. The protagonist casually realized that he may not have mentioned it earlier. Evan, already accustomed to such situations, remarked that a trip to the Green Magic Tower would normally take only a week. The protagonist clarified that their destination was instead the Blue Magic Tower. Evan immediately understood the implication, recognizing its proximity to Labyrinth City and the distance involved. With that, he began preparations right away and exited the room. Left alone, the protagonist laid down on the sofa, feeling drained at the thought of spending an entire month traveling by carriage. Despite the exhaustion it brought just thinking about it, he accepted that there was no alternative. The item he needed to support his limited mana capacity was located there. The mention of Labyrinth City stirred old memories. Supporting his head with one hand, he recalled his experiences from the game. He had spent an immense amount of time grinding in that area. The labyrinth, situated at the heart of the city, was the primary level grinding zone in Psychedelia. The deeper one descended, the higher the quality of items that could be obtained. Despite countless players attempting it, no one had ever reached the end. Even after using a cheat to reach the 150th floor, he remembered discovering that there were still more floors below. He questioned the developers' intentions, wondering why such unreachable depths even existed. Those depths were known to consistently yield relics and artifacts, which explained why the profession of official magic appraiser had become so popular, virtually guaranteeing wealth. His thoughts shifted to Rinna, who had mentioned that she would soon take the appraiser exam. Given her talent, he believed she would pass without difficulty. As he rested on the sofa, another thought surfaced. Compared to the gifts given to the others, he felt that Rinna's might have been insufficient. Its function was limited to appraising equipment items. If it turned out to be inadequate, he resolved to send her additional support. The scene then shifted to Labyrinth City, Larthania. The city was ruled by no one. It existed as a gathering place for explorers and mercenaries alike. Passing through countless shops in the southern district eventually led to a discreet appraisal shop known as Murd. Despite its hidden location, the shop had quietly gained fame for its unique services and primarily catered to nobles and A-rank explorers. Inside the shop, among the gathered crowd, stood the Lord of Larthania. Rinna completed the appraisal and presented the results. She explained the artifact's properties, noting that it ignited flames using mana and possessed an imprinting function. She further clarified that even a small amount of mana could sustain the flame for an extended period. Impressed by its improved efficiency, the Lord accepted the artifact and departed with his companion. Once the shop cleared, Rinna removed her mask and let out a quiet breath of relief. As she turned around, her attention was drawn to another artifact. Examining it, she realized that it too could be imprinted. The reason the shop had become famous, despite being tucked away in a corner, was because this imprinting ability was a gift from the Great Moon. She then moved into another room, stopping before a massive, eye-shaped magical structure. Reflecting inwardly, she recalled how she had not understood the reason behind being told to become an appraiser. She knew that the one guiding her was connected to Palin from the era of the Forgotten Outer Gods. Although she understood that everything so far had been done to eliminate the Black Things, she struggled to see how this role aligned with that goal. Her thoughts drifted back to when she had first arrived in the city. At the time, she questioned what becoming an appraiser had to do with fighting the Black Things. That confusion vanished the moment she witnessed the gift she had been given. The Eye of the Stalker was capable of rapidly identifying items below a certain mana threshold, assisting with appraisal. However, it differed from anything recorded in existing libraries. After its seals were broken, its imprint awakened. She came to understand that to gain the strength needed to fight the Black Things, this item had to be awakened fully. It was both a power and a means through which sacrifices could be offered. The narration returned to the present moment as Rinna placed the artifact before the Eye of the Stalker. A focused beam emerged from the structure, enveloping the artifact as the imprinting process began. Once the magical phenomenon concluded, she examined the artifact in her hand and quietly assessed the remaining sacrifices required for its full awakening. She reflected on the mechanism behind the process. In exchange for enhancing the relic's attributes, the eye absorbed a corresponding essence from the item itself, gradually altering its own nature. The reaction was limited to specific high-tier relics, and sacrificing an incompatible item would erase the accumulated progress entirely. The task required precise appraisal and the careful selection of suitable sacrifices marked by imprints. Holding the eye with confidence, she acknowledged that this responsibility was hers alone. Born with the library of eternity, her purpose remained unchanged. Everything she did was directed toward killing the Black Wolf, all proceeding according to the will of the Great Moon. 3 weeks later, the scene shifted to the Blue Magic Tower. The protagonist arrived at the tower and entered its interior, where he encountered the Vice Tower Master, a six-circle mage. She was already engaged in her duties and showed little interest in his presence. He remained silent as he observed her, recognizing her from the main storyline he remembered. At this point in time, she still held the position of Vice Tower Master, as the central events had yet to begin. His thoughts returned to his past experiences in the game. She had once been a prodigy who reached the 8th circle at an unusually young age and eventually became the Tower Master herself. The Magic Tower not only possessed immense power, but also controlled the production of essential resources, granting it influence comparable to that of noble houses. Despite the authority expected of someone who had surpassed human limits, her current attitude felt excessive. When he finally stated his identity and purpose, he explained his intent to address the issue of the Time Gate and asserted that he could eliminate it. Inwardly, he recalled the nature of the Time Gate. It was a fissure connected to an unknown subspace, forming in areas where magic was frequently used. Its existence caused anomalies that resulted in severe damage. The Vice Tower Master dismissed the claim outright and ordered him to leave. Confusion followed as events diverged from what he remembered. He attempted to press the matter further, but she mocked the notion and reacted with open irritation, clearly accustomed to similar claims from countless visitors. He insisted internally that he was being treated unfairly, unable to understand her distrust. As she spoke again, her demeanor shifted, and she addressed the rumors circulating about his rise to power, implying that his title was the result of chance rather than merit. Her anger manifested visibly as blue mana flared around her, warning him against bringing disruption into the tower. The protagonist was momentarily stunned. He realized that his quiet lifestyle may have contributed to such rumors spreading unchecked. Despite her appearance as a work-focused mage, she was surprisingly informed about external affairs. Her presence alone unsettled him. Evan stood close by, fully aware that interfering would end disastrously. Despite this, the protagonist acknowledged his own desperation. Stepping forward, he made a decisive offer, staking everything he owned on his claim. She dismissed the statement as nonsense, but his resolve did not waver. He proposed formal accountability, considering the offer a fair exchange for a brief opportunity. After a moment of consideration, she led him toward a sealed chamber. Upon arrival, she identified the location of the Time Gate and reminded him of the consequences of failure. He entered without hesitation. As she watched, her assessment of him grew increasingly dismissive. His mana capacity was minimal, his sensory talent barely exceeded average, and his standing remained at the edge of the 2nd circle. To her, his confidence appeared misplaced. She understood that most Time Gates naturally disappeared after releasing their relics, rendering intervention unnecessary. Yet this particular gate had remained active for over 2 years, causing persistent disturbances. The two reached the fractured structure of the Time Gate. The protagonist stood motionless before it. She observed his actions closely, noticing that he had no intention of using a staff. The realization unsettled her. Such a method was considered archaic, bordering on myth even in ancient texts. As irritation rose, she prepared to interrupt, only to sense something profoundly wrong. Her body would not respond. Neither she nor the surrounding environment could move. Everything had come to a halt. In that frozen moment, a massive crimson structure resembling a sealed eye manifested before them. Without warning, the eye slowly opened. The Vice Tower Master's eye of observation activated on its own. The ability began to perceive something far beyond conventional understanding, peering directly into the essence of the unknown. For a brief moment, comprehension seemed possible, but instinctively her thoughts recoiled. She forced herself to stop thinking, aware that enlightenment itself could be fatal. Certain truths were not meant to be known. Doom, much like a vessel already filled with poison, was predetermined. Absolute silence followed, and with it, acceptance of an unspoken demand. Once the phenomenon ended, the Time Gate was fully closed. The protagonist assessed the situation calmly, recognizing that the task had been simple for him due to the use of a specialized item and method. He claimed the relic produced by the time gate, internally noting that he had relied on random magic several times to obscure the process, unsure whether the Vice Tower Master had been misled by it. The Vice Tower Master responded with visible tension and fear, clearly shaken. Her reaction confused him, as he wondered whether his deception had failed. Nevertheless, he attempted to downplay the situation, indicating that secrecy was unnecessary. Her behavior escalated instead. She became overly insistent, promising absolute silence and demonstrating an intense desire to prove her trustworthiness. The sudden shift left the protagonist perplexed, unable to understand the source of her distress. After leaving the sealed chamber and returning to the main hall of the Magic Tower, the protagonist prepared to depart. As he did, the Vice Tower Master hurried after him, carrying a box of mana potions. She offered them with visible excitement and sincerity. Upon examining them, the protagonist realized they were of exceptionally high quality, far beyond what was normally available. Even a pair of such potions held value comparable to an entire mansion. The generosity felt excessive, and he questioned whether closing the time gate alone justified such a reaction. She continued to reaffirm her silence, and then escalated matters further by proposing a mana oath. This only deepened his confusion. Before he could process the situation, she invoked the oath herself, manifesting chains of power that bound him temporarily, demonstrating her commitment to keeping her promise. The protagonist accepted the outcome with resignation, acknowledging internally that the misunderstanding could no longer be resolved. As a result of the encounter, he had obtained the relic he sought, several high-grade potions, and a binding oath for reasons he still did not fully grasp. As they departed the Magic Tower, the scene shifted to the chariot. Evan examined the bracelet obtained from the time gate, noting its unremarkable appearance despite the difficulty involved in acquiring it. The protagonist confirmed that its true value lay not in appearance, but in function. Internally, he reflected on the bracelet's ability to absorb and store ambient mana through its embedded gems. Although its storage capacity was limited, it exceeded his own mana reserves, making it an ideal support item. While the realization was mildly embarrassing, he accepted it pragmatically, affirming that the item was intended for investigation and survival rather than combat. His thoughts then returned to the Vice Tower Master's strange behavior. Her sudden politeness remained unexplained. After exiting the chariot, the Vice Tower Master appeared once more to see him off. The protagonist reiterated his actual standing as a second circle mage. She acknowledged it without hesitation, reinforcing the impression that she truly believed it. As he departed, the protagonist remained uncertain whether her response was sincere or subtly mocking, leaving the encounter unresolved in his mind. After entering the chariot, the protagonist reflected on the situation in silence. The Vice Tower Master's reaction reminded him of Callia's behavior during their last encounter. The similarity left him uneasy, though he reassured himself that he would likely never have to face either of them again, making the discomfort inconsequential. As the chariot moved forward, his thoughts settled, and he casually remarked on the pleasant weather. Evan acknowledged the calm atmosphere, noting the peaceful surroundings. The scene then shifted to the Altea ducal house. Inside the residence, Callia and Lori sat together, sharing tea in a relaxed setting. Lori welcomed Callia warmly and expressed hope that her stay would be comfortable. Callia responded in kind, pleased to see that Lori remained unchanged and genuinely happy to meet her again. Lori observed that being together felt natural, as there was no need to consider rank or power between them. Callia agreed, inwardly reflecting on how Count Palacio's foresight continued to impress her. By following his suggestion and visiting Altea, she had quickly understood his intention. Through their conversations, both women realized they were already operating under Palacio's influence. In an alliance formed by his will, where an absolute authority existed above all others, internal power struggles held no meaning. As a result, Zenonia County and the Altea Duchy had naturally grown closer. Lori then brought up the timing of Callia's visit, noting that their official meeting was scheduled for the following month. Callia explained that the Count had sent her a letter, using her visit as a convenient pretext. As Lori examined the letter, Callia clarified that while it appeared to be an ordinary apology, its true nature was more deliberate. Lori quickly grasped its implication, recognizing it as an indirect order rather than a personal message. Kalia confirmed this interpretation and explained that she had brought the letter specifically to discuss its meaning together. She summarized its contents, outlining the noble factions the Count had interacted with, and noting their affiliations within the aristocratic and royalist camps. After hearing the explanation, Lori considered the implications. The message suggested that the Count held no allegiance to either faction. After a brief pause, she dismissed extreme interpretations and instead concluded that the Count intended to dismantle the existing noble power structure and replace it with a new regime. Kalia agreed with the assessment. Lori then reasoned that this was why she had been elevated to Duchess, as the prestige of Altea was necessary for the plan. With the hegemon of the West supporting her position, the groundwork for restructuring power would already be in place. Kalia acknowledged this conclusion, and Lori suggested that they begin discussing concrete plans. Meanwhile, at the Blue Magic Tower, a white-haired boy questioned a guard about the recent incident involving Count Palacio and the Time Gate. Upon receiving confirmation, he requested a more detailed explanation. As the guard observed him, she reflected silently, sensing that scattered puzzle pieces were beginning to move and assemble on their own. The scene then shifted back to the protagonist, who was struggling slightly while eating. Evan noticed and checked on him. The protagonist clarified that he had nearly choked on a piece of sweet potato, though he admitted it tasted good. Evan offered him water, which he accepted. With a tired expression, the protagonist expressed a simple desire to return home. Afterward, his thoughts turned inward once more, noting that it was likely time for Yusha to have received his letter. When the scene shifted back to the Blue Magic Tower, the Tower Master had already returned. The Tower Master of the Blue Magic Tower, Sele Micardo, an Eighth Circle mage, noticed something unusual the moment he arrived. The presence of the Time Gate, which had lingered for years, could no longer be sensed. Inside the tower, the Vice Tower Master, Penia Crazine, sat silently at a table. Her posture was subdued, her usual sharp demeanor absent. She confirmed that the task entrusted to her had been completed. This reaction immediately unsettled the Tower Master. Penia had risen to the position of Vice Tower Master at an exceptionally young age due to her extraordinary talent. Her arrogance and flippancy had always been unmistakable, yet her sincerity toward magic had led him to tolerate her personality. He had believed that once she reached the Seventh Circle, she would naturally gain humility upon realizing the limits of her achievements. However, the current situation was different. Penia was neither dismissive nor irritated. She appeared restrained, almost fearful. As she explained the events surrounding Count Palacio's visit, the Tower Master learned that the Time Gate had been closed, though Penia was unable to explain the method in detail due to an oath she had made. She stated that there was little more she could say beyond that fact. While offering casual reassurance, the Tower Master reflected inwardly. What had humbled Penia was not discipline or failure, but something far more unsettling, an incomprehensible form of magic. Whether it could truly be called origin magic remained uncertain, but the fear it inspired was undeniable. The fact that Penia no longer reacted defensively even to his gestures confirmed how deeply shaken she was. Count Palacio of the Asteria Kingdom left a strong impression. The Tower Master found the situation genuinely intriguing. 1 month after returning from the Blue Magic Tower, the protagonist continued his research in earnest. After obtaining the Mark of the Corrupted, his ability to use magic multiple times per day had increased, allowing him to conduct experiments more freely. While practicing, he focused on internal composure and methodical observation rather than force. As he recorded notes in his notebook, he reflected on a newly discovered rule regarding phrase usage. The effect appeared to be influenced not only by the phrases themselves, but also by how and where they were applied. However, the exact mechanism remained unclear. During this time, Evan arrived and observed the aftermath of the protagonist's training. Each instance of witnessing his magic left Evan increasingly uncertain of its classification. Despite technically remaining second circle magic, its output had grown noticeably stronger compared to months prior. The protagonist acknowledged the observation, noting that even a standard gravity spell should not be capable of producing such a crater. Internally, he reviewed the fundamentals. Gravity was a second circle spell, and even at maximum output, it lacked the power to crush targets outright. Yet the results before him contradicted that limitation. This led him to question whether his growth was genuine or merely perceived. Evan, standing behind him, silently regarded the magic with interest. The protagonist continued analyzing the phenomenon. The increase in power could not be attributed to proficiency or phrase enhancement alone. Greater proficiency only improved precision and realization, while phrases functioned more like attribute modifiers. Knowledge alone should not have caused such a sudden surge. He recalled spending months refining the phrase array for gravity and repeatedly alternating nearly identical phrase combinations. The conclusion he had previously reached was that power increased only gradually through fine-tuning optimal arrangements. There was no clear reason for the sudden jump in firepower. He considered the possibility that his physical condition had simply improved. Shortly afterward, Evan handed him a newly arrived letter from Yusha. The protagonist accepted it and decided to return to his room to read it privately. As they moved back inside, Evan noted that the protagonist was heading in already. The protagonist acknowledged this, explaining that he had already exhausted the maximum number of times he could use magic for the day. The scene settled quietly, with unanswered questions lingering beneath the surface. While moving forward, the protagonist reflects inwardly on the sudden increase in his magic. He considers whether it could be a form of compensation, possibly linked to a curse. A curse, as he understands it, is an oriental ritual in which the caster sacrifices themselves to place an affliction on another or even on themselves. Once inflicted, the target suffers a loss but receives a compensatory reward in return. However, since there is no one from the east around him, he dismisses that possibility. His thoughts then shift to the idea of faith. He recalls his position as the count of a small kingdom that the underworld has largely ignored, yet even that explanation feels illogical to him. Unable to reach a clear conclusion, he lets the matter go, deciding that sometimes it is better to move forward without overthinking. Still, a quiet doubt lingers as he wonders whether anything bad could come from it. The scene then shifts to the holy kingdom of Rosario in its capital city, Rhinal. The pure white city stands as a place where people worship the goddess of the moon and peace, Chironia. Near the East Prayer House, a young girl named Yusha is playing in front of a statue when a white-haired knight approaches her. The knight, Lok, observes her closely. Despite her being a nun of lower rank than a paladin and not wearing the sash of holy grace, he recognizes that she deserves respect. He bows before her sincerely. Maintaining his posture, he reflects on the recent mission in which 8 children and 25 lives were saved from a small village located between the eastern and western regions, attributing the success to her influence. Yusha, however, credits him instead, acknowledging that he was the one who carried out those deeds. Lok's thoughts drift back to his past. For 20 years, he lived in despair, unable to feel divine power and standing on the verge of giving up entirely. It was during that time that Yusha appeared in his life and guided him toward faith in the moon. Confused at first, he questioned the meaning of such belief, but her calm confidence stayed with him. Driven by desperation, he followed her advice and prayed to the moon for several days. Unexpectedly, he learned how to wield divine power. The joy he felt was overwhelming, yet it was soon followed by fear. He realized that his faith had been placed in the moon itself rather than directly in the goddess Chironia, leading him to worry that he had stepped onto the path of heresy. However, over time, he came to understand that all power borrowed from the gods was fundamentally the same. Even the artifacts bestowed in the name of the goddess responded to him, shining brightly in his hands and confirming the legitimacy of his divine power. Yusha later explained that faith originates from belief in the unseen and often takes a long time to manifest. It is easier, she implied, for people to place their trust in something that visibly exists. The moon, ever present in the sky, would always remain with him. Through this understanding, Lok realized that the goddess herself was the moon, and that this method allowed doubtful humans to believe with certainty. Back in the present, Lok expresses his gratitude through reverence rather than words. Yusha invites him to join in prayer, noting that many have already gathered. Together, they enter the prayer hall, where Yusha moves toward the center. Standing before the people, she leads the congregation in prayer to the great moon. As the crowd watches her gentle expression, some recognize her identity. She is known as Yusha Bludia, a sister of the Holy Kingdom of Rosario. The scene then shifts to the protagonist's house. Seated alone in his office, he goes through the day's letters and finds nothing unusual. Most of them contain ordinary updates about everyday life, which reassures him that everyone is living well. He acknowledges that this is a good thing, yet a quiet sadness settles in as he realizes that no one sends him letters anymore except Yusha, despite everyone doing well. As the thought lingers, he comes to a realization. From her perspective, it is only natural. To them, he is merely a stranger they have never truly met, someone distant rather than familiar. At best, he is likely remembered as nothing more than a kind and helpful figure. Resting his head on the table, he reminds himself that he has already accomplished his goal. He guided them onto the right path, so they would not destroy the world. With that in mind, he tells himself there is no reason to feel sad, repeating it internally until he forces a sense of calm. A slow breath follows, and for a moment, he convinces himself that he has found inner peace. Afterward, he raises his head again, thinking about Yusha. Despite being busy, she continues to write to him regularly. The realization stirs his emotions, and as he holds his head, his composure weakens slightly. He reflects on how he raised 5 children, yet only the eldest truly acknowledges his efforts. Even so, he reassures himself that he is fine. Ivan, who is also present in the room, interrupts the quiet moment. The sudden presence startles the protagonist, and he quickly regains his composure upon realizing Ivan is still there. Ivan, maintaining a serious demeanor, explains that he has received new information from the Information Guild regarding the children and has come to report it. The report begins with Rutten, whom the protagonist had asked about previously. According to the gathered information, Rutten has become a pirate. The unexpected update captures the protagonist's attention, prompting Ivan to continue with further details. Ivan explains that among the children, the most rumors currently surround Sealrang and Deus. Sealrang has achieved a 32-win streak out of the 100 victories required for her to earn the title of Baba Yaga. The number surprises the protagonist, especially when compared to the longest-known streak held by the Lion King, which stands at 41 consecutive wins. As he processes this, the protagonist reflects inwardly on the Lion King, a character known for overwhelming strength who once briefly joined the player's party. He recalls how the colony depends on powerful individuals to project its military strength, and realizes that Sealrang is steadily approaching the very peak of that hierarchy. Ivan then turns to Deus. His order has successfully executed one of the 8 barbarian chiefs, Kurga the Snowfield, who led a group capable of transforming into monsters through rituals. The mention immediately triggers the protagonist's memories. He recalls battling those same barbarians in the game and eliminating their god, Ultulris. He notes with relief that Ultulris only appears when the 5 deadly sins gather, making it unlikely for him to face that threat again. Pulling himself out of those memories, the protagonist concludes that there is no longer any need to worry about Deus. Ivan adds that, with this achievement, Deus is now regarded as being on the same level as Reinhardt, the First Sword. Hearing this, the protagonist briefly wonders if he should have gone to meet him, thinking that such a meeting might have been meaningful. Finally, Ivan reports on Rena. Having become an appraiser, she now specializes in imprinting black engravings that enhance the abilities of artifacts, marking yet another significant development among the children. The protagonist reacts with visible surprise as the report continues, finding it unexpected that such a thing could even exist. The information quickly brings his focus back to the main issue, and his thoughts settle on a single question regarding Rutten's current path. Ivan explains the situation in detail. Beyond the coast of Raxus lies the region known as the 7 Archipelagos, a place where the greatest pirates of the seas reside. Among them, Rutten has risen to become the captain of the first archipelago, the largest and most influential of them all. The revelation leaves the protagonist unsettled. He holds his head, struggling to accept it. Internally, he reflects on the years of support he had quietly provided, donating regularly so that Rutten could live a proud yet ordinary life. Instead, Rutten has become a pirate. A quiet sadness follows. The protagonist recalls sending Rutten to Raxus with a clear intention. Rutten possessed an exceptional ability to locate enemies, and as a rare sea Gookin, he could move freely through the water. Combined with the abundance of valuable relics scattered across the oceans of Raxus, the path of a treasure hunter seemed ideal and full of promise. Becoming a pirate was never part of that plan. Ivan, however, frames the situation differently. Becoming the captain of a great pirate crew effectively makes one the ruler of an island. Rutten has not only survived, but has risen to a position of immense influence, now standing as an important figure within a region. The protagonist acknowledges this reluctantly, though his expression remains subdued. His thoughts drift toward the unanswered question of how Rutten managed to defeat the former captain of the first archipelago. The captains are known as superhuman figures, individuals who never lose naval battles. One possible explanation comes to mind. Rutten may have salvaged only the most valuable relics from the old era and used them to equip himself properly. The protagonist recalls how much time and effort such relic hunting required, remembering the countless hours once spent pursuing similar goals. The realization settles heavily. The world does not always move according to his expectations, but this outcome feels particularly bitter. He remains lying motionless on the sofa as the weight of it sinks in, prompting Ivan to check on him. The scene then shifts. At the heart of the Principality of Korkia lies the massive maritime city of Raxus. Beyond its coast stretch the 7 paradises of pirates, with the first archipelago standing as the greatest among them. Its former captain, Alglide the Red Slayer, had ruled the region under the protection of the Heavenly King, power granted through immense wealth. The one who defeated him now stands as the new captain of the first archipelago. Standing atop a building, Rutten reflects on his past. His thoughts drift toward the concept of the Great Moon, something he had never taken much interest in before. At first, it was merely a distant presence, someone he felt gratitude toward rather than devotion. He remembers how his fate had once been sealed as a vivisection slave, only to be altered through that connection. Meeting Yusha and awakening his ability followed soon after, and much of his early work felt more like carrying out her will while acting as the Blue Moon. When he later received a direct order tied to the Great Moon, confusion took hold. The instruction to become a treasure hunter stirred discomfort rather than clarity. His true goal had always been revenge. The black-clad figures who massacred a peaceful clan on a forgotten island, the hunters who murdered his exhausted parents after they barely escaped to the continent, and the ones who sold him into slavery had never left his mind. To him, the idea that becoming a treasure hunter and the so-called gift were connected to his promised revenge made little sense. In the end, he resolves to at least make it appear as though he is following the order. His attention shifts as noise carries from nearby. He notices the wanted notices and the proclamations surrounding the chosen great pirates. The Heavenly King claims that only the selected captains of the 7 archipelagos can receive protection through wealth, a declaration spread deliberately. Rutten recognizes the truth beneath the lie. True power is granted only through a sacred ritual involving the bodies of sea godkin, the means by which the sea god Clyad bestows strength. Every captain of the 7 archipelagos wields that stolen power. The realization sharpens into hatred. The same hunters responsible for his parents' deaths now stand empowered, their crimes woven into the very foundation of the pirate hierarchy. Rutten reflects while staring at the ship before him, troubled by how the Great Moon seemed to understand his past despite never being told. It feels as though an opportunity for revenge had been deliberately arranged to fulfill an unspoken promise. However, revenge cannot be carried out immediately, as his enemies wield the power of the sea god and stand far beyond ordinary strength. If everything was intentional, then the gift he received must also have meaning. His thoughts turn to the spectacles of Amrita, the gift bestowed upon him. They allow him to identify and locate relics deep beneath the sea, compensating for his lack of raw force. Diving from the mountain into the ocean, he descends to the seabed and discovers a chest filled with jewels, along with a pair of golden anklets. After equipping them, he emerges from the water, realizing that simple gratitude had been foolish. Gazing at the moon, he understands that the Great Moon not only brought the target of his revenge directly before him, but also ensured every condition was carefully arranged. The order written in the letter becomes clear. He is meant to carry out his revenge and seize control of the 7 archipelagos. A memory of Yusha's words resurfaces, and what once meant nothing slowly becomes engraved in his heart as unwavering trust. His resolve settles firmly beneath the moonlight. 3 months later, as the oppressive heat fades, autumn arrives along with the biennial grand social gathering of Asteria. The protagonist is compelled to attend. Mandatory participation every 4 years remains deeply unpleasant. Traveling by chariot, he notes the allied carriages moving together to avoid bandit attacks, finding the custom irritating and strange. Later, inside a bar, he realizes that nobles pose a greater nuisance than bandits ever could. Their disdain is clear, fueled by rumors that his title was earned through coincidence and that his finances were unstable. Such assumptions stem from the infamous authority of Palatio, once built upon dominance over the eastern underworld and wealth gathered from it. Yet that influence was abandoned willingly. Satisfied with his current life and earning more than enough through legitimate means, he chose to sever ties with the underworld altogether. As a result, The eastern underworld has become a battleground for insignificant figures scrambling to fill the void, while the belief that his rise was merely luck has quietly solidified as accepted truth. The protagonist reflects with quiet sadness, already aware that his reputation has fallen from being regarded as the mastermind of the county to being dismissed as nothing more than a fortunate and immature noble. The open mockery directed at him confirms this shift, as the nobles no longer bother hiding their contempt. Their behavior crosses from casual ridicule into deliberate insult. As he observes them, realization dawns. These nobles were once subordinates crushed under Palatio's authority, and now they vent the humiliation they once endured by mocking him instead. Though he was never the one responsible for their suffering, he finds himself bearing the resentment, much like facing faceless critics who lash out simply to feel superior. Evan arrives with roasted corn, suggesting that ignoring the provocation is the best course of action. The protagonist accepts this distraction, finding comfort in the warmth and simplicity of staple food during the cold evening. Even as further accusations are thrown his way regarding the decline of underworld forces and his neglected appearance, he remains detached, noting how their insults have become repetitive and almost absurd. He continues eating calmly, appreciating the moment despite everything. The scene shifts north to an endless frozen land consumed by barbarian territory. The region is shrouded in a dull, lifeless gray, scattered with fallen bodies. Among them lies Klecken, one of the 8 barbarian chiefs, barely clinging to life. For barbarians who revere combat above all else, dying in battle is the greatest honor, yet Klecken's fate is one of disgrace. He had been deceived by a knight of Caliban who promised an honorable duel, only for treachery to follow. Wounded and unable to rise, Klecken learns of Kurga of the Snowfield's downfall and recognizes that he, too, has met a shameful end. Crushed by this realization, he is confronted by an otherworldly presence. A strange, long-haired figure manifests, invoking the name of Ultoris, the god revered by the barbarians. Klecken, broken and desperate, calls upon that divine name. The figure responds with twisted satisfaction, signaling that Klecken's plea has been acknowledged.